Chapter 2230. The Cave of the Demonic Heart was the only connection between the white world and the black world. It was the passage from the white world to the black world and from the black world to the white world. It was naturally formed and not man-made. The Cave of the Demonic Heart could not be destroyed. Otherwise, it would have been destroyed by the ruler of the heavenly palace. Therefore, if the Cave of the Demonic Heart could not be destroyed, someone had to be sent to guard it to prevent the demonic heart from appearing in the white world through the Cave of the Demonic Heart and causing invisible damage. It could even endanger the entire void. Guarding the Cave of the Demonic Heart was not a good job, but it was not bad either. It could earn merits. Naturally, fighting the demonic heart was also a process of resisting the demonic heart. If they were attacked by the demonic heart again, they would not be so helpless. According to Yi Ming and the other three, there might not be any inner demons appearing even after a few years. Usually, they would cultivate and occasionally exchange pointers. It was possible that Chun Zong spent his 10 years guarding the Cave of the Demonic Heart while cultivating. Of course, nothing was absolute. It was difficult to predict what kind of danger lurked in the depths of the demonic heart. According to Chun Zong's understanding, although the Cave of the Demonic Heart was divided into 18 levels, if one wanted to enter the black world, they had to enter from the 18th level. As for how Chun Zong came to the 8th level, it was because the heavenly palace had built a small void gate here. It could be said that every level of the Devil's Heart Grotto had a void door. This made it extremely convenient for the people guarding the Devil's Heart Grotto. They could directly reach the corresponding level without having to enter the depths of each Devil's Heart Grotto and enter the next level. At the same time, if the demonic heart attacked and gained the upper hand, it could also leave the demonic heart cave through the void gate. This kind of thing had happened before. Fortunately, the Down Master level experts were guarding the outermost area. Unless it was a king-level demonic heart, they would immediately be killed by the Down Master level experts as soon as they went out. After 10 years of seclusion, Chun Zong had transformed his active potential into his own strength. Now, his potential had returned to its usual state. It was much more difficult to excavate it during the incubation period. However, cultivation was like this. Bit by bit, one had to excavate one's potential and transform it into strength, increasing one's combat strength bit by bit. Wanting to reach the heavens in a single bound was just wishful thinking. Any cultivator would cultivate one step at a time, but only a few could reach the top. Most of them would struggle to get there. No matter how slow the improvement was, Chun Zong would not give up on refining. Cultivation method, swordplay, secret technique, everything required cultivation. Fortunately, Chun Zong had 10 heart palaces. Apart from Heart Flame and Heart Perception, the Great Void Evasion Art and Great Refining Void God, I also occupied 2 heart palaces and cultivated them on their own. Moreover, they had already reached major completion. Of course, the remaining 6 heart palaces couldn't be left empty. After all, there were Ubijnas that could cultivate Ubijnas on their own. If they didn't use them, it would be a waste. Under normal circumstances, cultivators of the Heavenly Palace would usually master a few more mystiques than other cultivators, sometimes even more than a dozen. The reason for this was the Heart Palace forged by the 33 Heavens of Will. Chun Zong had a choice of which mystiques to put into the remaining 6 heart palaces. In terms of offense, he had the Heart Refinement Sword Art. In terms of trapping enemies, he had the Sect Convergence Sword Art. No, it was now officially called the Great World Sword Art. In terms of defense, he had the Great Cycle Sword Realm derived from the Extreme Heart Phaseless Sword. Since he had both offense and defense, Chun Zong naturally made other choices. He was used to traveling alone and might encounter all kinds of dangers, so he naturally had to be more comprehensive. There were many Ubijnas and secret techniques stored in the Heart Image Pavilion of the Heavenly Palace. Some were collected from the outside world, while others were self-created by cultivators of the Heavenly Palace. Of course, the Blazing Dragon Breath technique also needed to be cultivated. If he placed it directly in the Heart Palace, it would be related to the Purple World Star Dragon Flame. The potential of such a divine flame was also extraordinary. Unfortunately, The purple world star dragon flame was still a low-level divine flame and hadn't broken through to the mid-level. Therefore, it couldn't increase his combat strength much. After all, the low level was equivalent to the Dao controlling realm, while the mid-level was equivalent to the Yuanming realm. He had to think a way to make the purple world star dragon flame break through to the mid-level. Once the blazing dragon breath technique was improved, the purple world star dragon flame would have a certain chance of breaking through. For the Sixth Heart Palace, Chunzong chose a curse technique called the Demon Sealing Curse, or rather, a sealing technique. This was an Abhijna's and secret technique created by a sovereign of the Heavenly Palace. Its purpose was to deal with inner demons. It wasn't completely accurate to call it inner demons. It should be used to deal with negative life forms like inner demons. Of course, it was most effective against inner demons. Its main purpose was to seal inner demons, whether it was one's own inner demons or those of the outside world. This might be useful for guarding the inner demon cave. After all, inner demons weren't that easy to kill. Sealing them was a good method. For the Seventh Heart Palace, he placed a combat Abhijnas, Extreme Lightning. Chunzong was adept at close combat, and the Heart Refinement Sword Art would be more powerful in close combat. Therefore, a movement technique that could allow one to close in on a target with extreme speed was rather important. If used well, it could catch the enemy off guard. For the Eighth Heart Palace, he placed a body-refining Abhijna's secret technique, Instant Healing. The self-healing ability of body-refining cultivators surpassed that of Qi refinement cultivators. This was where their advantage lay. This advantage was further amplified after they condensed their divine bodies. The self-healing speed of a low-level divine body realm was extremely fast. Some superficial wounds could be healed in the blink of an eye. However, injuries such as broken arms and legs weren't that easy to heal unless they were supplemented with some secret medicine. At the phenomenal divine body realm, serious injuries such as broken limbs could be self-healed. However, it required some time. It was fine during normal times, but it would affect the outcome of a high-intensity battle. As for the instant healing secret technique, its principle was to heal instantly and heal instantly. It was equivalent to shortening the self-healing time to within a breath. The price was that one's own energy would be greatly depleted. Self-healing didn't heal out of thin air. It consumed one's own energy. When one's energy was depleted, the self-healing ability would naturally lose its effect temporarily. Therefore, it wasn't that body refiners couldn't be killed, it was just that it was difficult to kill them. One could either directly destroy them with an extremely tyrannical power, or continuously injure them and exhaust their energy to heal themselves until they ran out of energy and died. Of course, it was also possible to directly destroy the opponent's spirit. The instant healing secret technique undoubtedly increased one's high-intensity combat ability. For the Abhijnas in the Ninth Heart Palace, Chunzong chose a spirit defense secret technique called Soul Rampart. As the name implied, it was a secret technique that protected the spirit. It was very necessary for body refining and spirit cultivation. The ability in the 10th Palace was a rare restoration-type secret technique called the Flower Blooms and Withers. This secret technique did not have a high or low level. It could only be used to accumulate the power of the secret technique until it was completely accumulated. Its effect was to completely recover the power of the secret technique in a short period of time after using up all the power of the secret technique. Using the blossoming and withering secret technique consumed the power of the secret technique that one continuously accumulated. After using it, it would dissipate completely. If one wanted to use it again, one would have to continue accumulating the power of the secret technique. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that the Heart Palace's effect on the cultivation of the heart refinement to one sword technique and the Great World Sword technique was very limited, Chunzong would definitely have occupied 2 heart palaces. Perhaps it was also because the heart refinement to one sword technique and the Great World Sword technique were closely related to one's own comprehension of the Great Tao that the heart palace's effect on cultivation was very weak. These 2 self-created Abhijnas did indeed require one to comprehend them on their own. The Great Void Escape technique was suitable for long-distance travel. Of course, it could also be used for short-distance travel to achieve unexpected results. The Great Refining Void God I could see through illusions and also had the effect of directly attacking the target's spirit. It was also very practical. The Flaming Dragon Breath technique was related to the cultivation of the divine fire. The demon sealing spell could better deal with inner demons, whether they were hidden dangers in one's own body or external inner demons. The Extreme Lightning was a combat body movement Ubijnas. The instant recovery Ubijnas could instantly increase the consumption of one's own power, thus allowing one to recover in an instant and heal all injuries. The Soul Rampart was a soul defense Ubijnas. It might not be very effective in normal times, but it was very useful at critical moments and was very likely to save one's life. After all, the divine body at the level of great success had amazing self-healing ability. Coupled with the instant recovery Ubijnas, as long as one's body was not crushed into pieces, one could quickly recover. However, once one's spirit was injured, it would be difficult to recover. Therefore, the defense of the spirit was very necessary. As for the blossoming and withering Ubijnas, after accumulating enough power, one could recover when one was exhausted. It was also of great help in battle. It had to be said that the various Ubijnas that Chunzong had chosen to put into the Heart Palace were almost all beneficial to battle. The power of the Heart Refinement Sword Art and the Great World Sword Art was not only related to the power of the Great Path and cultivation, but also to the Sword Principle domain. The Great Path was difficult to comprehend, and it was not easy to improve one's cultivation base, especially since one had just broken through to the beginner level of the Yuanming realm. Although it had been consolidated, it was still very far from the intermediate level. In comparison, Chunzong felt that the Sword Principle domain still had room for improvement. For 1,000 meters was definitely not the current upper limit. As long as the Sword Principle domain continued to improve, the Heart Refinement Sword Art and the Great World Sword Art would also become more powerful. The Sword Principle domain of 4,000 meters was released and completely enveloped. When Yi Ming and the other three sensed it, they were all shocked. To be able to become true disciples of the Will Heavenly Palace, their talent was very high. Now that their cultivation base was at the Yuanming realm, they had already begun to touch upon the Dao domain. Therefore, they could sense Chunzong's Sword Principle domain. The power of the domain shocked them. In terms of domain alone, Chunzong had left them in the dust. Most Yuanming realm cultivators had yet to comprehend a domain. Only a few people with outstanding talent had. There were very few people who could comprehend a Dao domain at the Dao manipulation realm. They were the top geniuses. Chapter 22:31. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye as he cultivated. After 3 years, Chunzong also felt that his cultivation had slowed down. Compared to 3 years ago, his combat strength did not increase significantly. It could only be said that it was negligible. However, it was not as if Chunzong had not gained anything in the past 3 years. His foundation had become even more solid, and he had laid a better foundation for his next breakthrough. One day, Chunzong walked out of his room, intending to take a deeper look. Since he had come to the demonic heart cave, it was obviously not Chunzong's style to stay in his room. Knowing that Chunzong planned to move forward, Yi Ming and the other three did not stop him. They only told him not to go too deep to prevent accidents. Nodding, Chunzong walked out of his room, carrying the Extreme Heart Phaseless sword with him. He walked into the darkness ahead. The darkness was like an abyss, seemingly bottomless. Of course, there was a bottom line. The bottom line was to enter the next level, one level after another, until one reached the last level. The structure of the 18th level of the Demonic Heart Cave was very interesting. From the deepest part of the first level, one would directly lead to the deepest part of the second level, the deepest part of the third level, and all the way to the deepest part of the 18th level. Chunzong did not plan to reach the deepest part of the passage because he did not plan to go deep into the next level. The 8th level was where he was guarding. As long as he guarded it for 10 years, he would leave and complete the first task of the Taoist assessment. Taking a step forward, Chun Zong walked step by step toward the darkness that seemed like an abyss that could devour everything. The darkness was extremely deep. Gradually, Chun Zong stepped into the darkness as if his body was being swallowed. It was silent inside. Even with Chun Zong's amazing eyesight, it was difficult for him to see far. He could only see a range of about 10 meters. Beyond that, it began to become blurry. Within 100 meters, there was only darkness. Even Chun Zong found that his divine telekinesis was suppressed here. However, his Sword Dao territory was not suppressed. It covered more than 4,000 meters, and everything was within Chun Zong's perception. After patrolling around and almost going deep, Chun Zong turned around and returned to his room to cultivate again. Outside, a series of noises sounded, as if there were people fighting fiercely. Chun Zong scanned with his divine telekinesis and saw that Yi Ming was fighting the three of them alone. Cultivation was one thing. Sometimes, a battle was necessary to exercise one's limbs. Chun Zong was itching for a fight. 1 against 4. He was alone while Yi Ming and the other 3 worked together. Fight! Yi Ming and the rest were happy to do that. A few years ago, when Chun Zong had just arrived, he had defeated Yi Ming with a single slash of his sword. He had not fought since then. When the battle began, none of them used any secret techniques. Instead, they fought with their normal combat power. With a sword in hand, Yi Ming and the other 3 joined forces and attacked from 4 directions. However, they could not do anything to Chun Zong. On the contrary, Chun Zong gradually figured out their moves and targeted them directly. Gradually, they were at a disadvantage. The battle lasted for an hour. Thank you, Guardian. Yi Ming and the other 3 immediately expressed their gratitude to Chun Zong as soon as they stopped fighting. They had all benefited from the fierce battle earlier because Chun Zong had seen through their combat style, and so on. He targeted their weaknesses, allowing them to realize their shortcomings in the battle and improve on them. Don't worry about it. Chun Zong smiled lightly. It was considered a reward for him to ease his itching hands. On the 5th year, there was a sudden change. There seemed to be a black light fluctuating in the darkness. There seemed to be a black mist surging. Vaguely, there seemed to be a strange voice that was filled with malice. Inner demons. Yi Ming and the rest reacted faster than Chun Zong because they had been guarding this place for decades. It was not their first time being attacked by inner demons. However, it was Chun Zong's first time. Guardian, I think the inner demons are attacking us, Yi Ming said to Chun Zong. Inner demons? Chun Zong's eyes lit up slightly. They had been here for 5 years. There were still 5 years until the end of the mission. It would be a pity if they were not attacked by inner demons. The roars that were filled with evil grew increasingly closer and clearer. Chun Zong and the rest could clearly sense that evil aura was continuously seeping out from the abyss like darkness and heading straight for them. Chun Zong's eyes focused slightly. A bright light shot out from the bottom of his eyes, as if it could pierce through the void. Vaguely, he seemed to see silhouettes appearing in the darkness and approaching them. The inner demons in the inner demon realm don't have a physical body. However, after entering the inner demon cave, they'll slowly transform and have a physical body, Yi Ming said. It's difficult to attack the inner demons without a physical body. We can attack the inner demons with a physical body, but it's difficult to kill them. Finally, the first silhouette charged out of the darkness. It had no legs and floated out like a ghost. However, it was not slow at all, especially when it floated out of the darkness. The inner demon's eyes suddenly emitted a dazzling red light. It was scarlet and looked extremely evil. Cultivator, you're mine. There seemed to be countless overlapping voices coming from the inner demon's mouth. It was as if the inner demon had merged with countless chaotic consciousnesses and spoke at the same time. The inner demons in the inner demon realm were the reflections of the inner demons in the void. Therefore, no one knew how many inner demons there were in the inner demon realm. Even the master of a heavenly palace did not know. However, one thing was certain. The inner demons in the inner demon realm would constantly fight and devour their opponents. The more they devoured, the stronger they would become. Normally, the inner demons that could enter the inner demon cave would have grown to the level of an imminent god cultivator after devouring many times. The inner demons did not have any civilization or inheritance. The only thing they knew was to devour their opponents and find other living beings, such as humans or other races, to invade and devour their consciousnesses, invade their souls, and take over their bodies to wreak havoc everywhere. The heavenly palace divided the inner demons into two types, inner demons and outer demons. The so-called inner demons were the inner demons that were born in one's mind. They were like hidden enemies, but they were of the same origin and could not be completely eliminated. The so-called outer demons referred to the inner demons outside of one's body. Normally, it referred to the inner demons in the inner demon realm. If one had an inner demon, it would definitely be a disaster if the outer demons invaded. It would be an indescribable disaster. Therefore, Chunzong could not let the outer demons invade. Otherwise, the inner demon that was only left with a bit of black light in his god soul would definitely awaken. Moreover, it would awaken with the help of God. The appearance of the first inner demon made Yi Ming and the other three look a little complicated. They seemed to be a little excited. They felt like it had been too long. Even if they fought, it would be difficult to relieve the fighting factor in their bones. They were also a little afraid because the outer demons were very terrifying and difficult to deal with. They were not easy to deal with, and even more difficult to kill. However, no matter what, the outer demons were coming. The only way was to stop them or even defeat them. According to Chun Zong's understanding, the outer demons were very difficult to kill. They could only be defeated slowly. Once they knew that they could not defeat them and that most of their strength had been exhausted, the outer demons would retreat. There was a difference between the outer demons and the inner demons. The outer demons did not have much intelligence because they were formed by devouring each other. Their consciousness was very chaotic. Under the chaotic conflict of multiple consciousnesses, only a small consciousness was left to drive instincts. Whether it was attacking or escaping, it was an instinct under the chaotic consciousness. The first outer demon charged over. Powerful and chaotic evil demonic energy spread out and spread in all directions. Chunzong's primordial spirit immediately felt that the evil aura was unknowingly attacking his mind and will, trying to mess up his mind and will. However, an attack of such a level could not affect Yi Ming and the other three, let alone him. However, Chunzong understood that the more outer demons there were, the more the chaotic willpower attack would stack. The more there were, the more powerful it would be. In the end, it would reach a point where even he could not withstand it. Let's give it a try then. Without hesitation, Chunzong formed a seal with one hand. In an instant, a black light was outlined like a brush. In a flash, it condensed into a curse seal and shot out. The demon sealing curse. Chunzong found this secret method in the mental image pavilion. Its level was only at the heavenly divinity level. It was not very high, but it was very suitable for the time being. Moreover, under Chunzong's comprehension and Heart Palace's cultivation, this secret method had reached small accomplishment. The small accomplishment, heavenly divinity, demon sealing curse, immediately released a shocking power when Chunzong used it. In an instant, it hit the outer demon. The black light quickly spread out and turned into black threads. It was like vines that grew in an instant. It also looked like countless silk threads that surrounded the outer demon. Shrink! The black light shrunk rapidly, but the outer demon inside kept resisting. In the end, the outer demon could not resist the demon sealing curse's power. It was sealed by the demon sealing curse and turned into a ball of black light the size of a fist. Through the black light, one could vaguely see a figure inside. It was struggling and erupting with power as if it was trying to break the black light. Chunzong also felt that the demon sealing curse's power was being depleted as the outer demon kept resisting. In other words, the demon sealing curse's power was not permanent. It would be depleted as time passed, and it would also be depleted due to the inner demon's resistance. Of course, if the outer demon was injured first, its resistance would weaken, and the demon's sealing curse's depletion would slow down. Chunzong attacked again. He cast another demon sealing curse to strengthen the black light ball. Immediately, the second, third, and even more outer demons charged out of the darkness. When they saw Chunzong and the other three, they immediately went berserk and charged at them. Yi Ming and the other three attacked immediately. They had also cultivated the demon sealing curse, but they did not cast it immediately. They would first cripple the outer demon before casting the demon sealing curse. The success rate would be higher. After all, they were inferior to Chunzong when it came to mental power and God soul power. Even though Chunzong's soul had not recovered yet, they were still able to cast the demon sealing curse. Apart from being related to one's cultivation level, the demon sealing curse's power was also closely related to one's God soul power and mental power. Chapter 2232. Roars rose and fell like waves. More and more external heart demons rushed out of the darkness. There were already more than a dozen of them, and each of them was at the elite level, equivalent to the Origin Underworld stage. Chunzong and the other four took action to resist the invasion of the external heart demons and prevent them from rushing out. Otherwise, it would be a dereliction of duty, and they would have their merit points deducted. For Chunzong, the consequences were even more serious. It would leave a bad record in the mission assessment and might affect his promotion to Path Chosen. Retreat, Chunzong shouted. Yi Ming and the other three used their movement techniques and turned into streams of light to retreat. Great World Sword Technique, Forest of 10,000 Trees. In an instant, a sword Dao domain of more than 4,000 meters pressed down. Trees of sword chi that were more than 10 meters tall condensed in the air and pressed down, directly enveloping the external heart demons and suppressing them in a forest of sword chi. The main power of the Great World Sword Technique was to suppress and restrain, but its power was not weak at all. Although the external heart demons were very strong, their combat strength was at most equivalent to the 3-star or 4-star level. Under Chunzong's sword, the external heart demons were immediately suppressed and could not escape for a while. Kill! Yi Ming and the other three shouted and immediately attacked. The external heart demons, suppressed by the forest of 10,000 trees, were easier to deal with. However, even if they attacked the external heart demon, they could not kill it immediately. This was different from cultivators. Attacking the external heart demon would only weaken its power. When its power was weakened to the extreme, the external heart demon would lose half of its physical body and become illusory. At that time, they could either seize the opportunity to seal it or let the external heart demon seize the opportunity to escape and return to the mental demon realm. In most cases, the external heart demons escaped. Their reactions were very fast. After losing half of their physical body, they seemed to have lost their restraints. Once they escaped into the darkness, they merged into it and were difficult to capture them. Under the suppression of the forest of 10,000 trees, the external heart demons could not escape. Under the joint attack of Chunzong, Yi Ming, and the others, they were constantly injured and their bodies gradually shattered. At the same time, the sword chi of the forest of 10,000 trees would constantly wear down the power of the external heart demons. More than a dozen external heart demons exploded and turned into illusory black shadows. In the blink of an eye, they broke free from the suppression of the forest of 10,000 trees. Half-corporeal external heart demons would possess physical attacks, but they would also be restricted. Everything had its pros and cons. Now that the half-entity had been shattered and could no longer be maintained, it turned into illusory shadows and was no longer restricted. In an instant, more than a dozen illusory shadows rushed out of the forest of 1,000 trees to suppress them. Some of them screamed and rushed toward Chunzong and the others, trying to enter their spirit sea and invade their vital spirits. Some of them rushed into the darkness in an attempt to escape. Demon Sealing Curse. Without hesitation, Chunzong and the other four immediately cast spells. The demon sealing incantation was a secret incantation that one had to learn to guard the heart demon cave. It was to better deal with external heart demons. Of course, it was also effective against heart demons. 5 rays of black light lit up in an instant and shot out in a flash. However, there were a total of 8 illusory shadows, and they were extremely fast and agile. They all streaked across the sky and flew toward Chunzong and the others. After breaking free from the half-entity, the external heart demons were more than a few times more agile. Under Chunzong's control, the demon sealing incantation accurately hit one of the illusory black lights and immediately sealed it. The sealing speed was extremely fast, and it was completed in an instant. It turned into a ball of black light and fell. There was also a ball of illusory black light flying toward it. With a flash of sword light, Chunzong attacked with his sword. However, Chunzong found that even if he cut the external heart demons, the damage was very limited. It was as if the power of the sword chi had decreased by many times in an instant. An idea flashed through Chunzong's mind. He thought of the purple star dragon flame. Although the purple star dragon flame was only a low-level divine fire, equivalent to the combat strength of a 12-star Dao manipulation realm cultivator, it had absorbed the flame aura in the furnace of the myriad tribulation divine fire mountain. It was a flame aura that could resist the external heart demons and even hurt them. Perhaps the purple star dragon flame also contained its characteristics and could deal with the external heart demons. The only difference was the strength of the effect. As for how effective it was, he would know after trying it out. Chunzong moved his mind, and in an instant, a dragon's roar sounded. Then, a purple flame with flickering black light appeared and turned into a fire dragon. It circled Chunzong's body and quickly wrapped around Chunzong's arm. The dragon's head happened to be at the palm of his hand. The dragon's roar was high in the sky and reverberated in all directions. Chunzong grabbed out with his palm. Like a fire dragon soaring in the sky, an extremely mysterious undulation appeared on his arm. Chunzong made a grabbing motion in the air, and there seemed to be an indescribable, mysterious power within it. No matter how nimble the external heart demon was, it was unable to evade. Instead, it felt as if it had been sent into Chunzong's palm, and it was also sent into the mouth of the purple star dragon flames. Burn! In an instant, as if oil had been added to the fire, the purple star dragon flame seemed to burn even more fiercely. At the same time, an extremely sharp and shrill voice sounded from the illusory black light. It was the external heart demon's scream. After all, the flame power of the 10,000 tribulation divine flame furnace had an obvious protective effect against external heart demons. If Chunzong's external heart demon had been an ordinary external heart demon, the consequences would have been very serious. However, Chunzong's external heart demon was extraordinary. Even the master of the will was shocked and helpless. Although the purple star dragon flame was only a low-level divine flame and didn't absorb much of the 10,000 tribulation divine flame furnace's power, it still had a certain effect on external heart demons. When dealing with external heart demons, the power of the purple star dragon flame could reach the level of a mid-level divine flame. Even if it was only a low-level, mid-level divine flame, it was still amazing. It burned and burned continuously. Shrill and shrill screams rang out continuously. One could see wisps of black smoke rising from the mouth of the purple star dragon flame. However, the burning speed was a little slow. It would probably take more than 100 breaths of time to burn this external heart demon to the ground. On the other side, Yi Ming and the other 3 dealt with it calmly. They used their movement techniques to avoid the external heart demon's attack. At the same time, they held the demon sealing spell in their hands and waited for an opportunity to attack. After all, they had guarded this place for decades. It was not the first time they had dealt with external heart demon's attack. They were very experienced. As long as they weren't attacked by many external heart demons at once, they could deal with it. Chunzong controlled the purple star dragon flame with one hand to burn the external heart demon while condensing the demon sealing spell with the other to seal the external heart demon. Under the Sword Dao territory, the external heart demon's speed was affected. Its trajectory was completely captured by Chunzong, so it couldn't escape at all. It didn't take long for all the inner demons to be sealed. "Thank you, Guardian." Yi Ming and the other three expressed their gratitude to Chunzong because it was Chunzong who helped them seal the external heart demons. If Chunzong hadn't helped them, although the external heart demons would have been sealed or escaped in the end, it would have taken time. Moreover, after being sealed, Chunzong didn't snatch it. Instead, it belonged to them. Guarding the external heart demon cave not only gave merit points, but they could also exchange merit points for sealing the external heart demons and turning them in. If they didn't turn them in, they could find a way to refine it into essence and absorb it on their own. After this wave of external heart demons attack was repelled, Chunzong returned to his room with the two sealed external heart demons. Once again, he activated the power of the purple star dragon flame to burn them. The external heart demons that were burned to death by the purple star dragon flame earlier left behind a little black glow after death. It seemed to be essence, pure essence without any impurities. It was the essence of the external heart demons. The essence of the external heart demons was very useful. It could strengthen one's consciousness. In other words, after absorbing the essence of the external heart demons, one's consciousness could be strengthened. An enhanced consciousness was greatly beneficial to battle. Not only could it strengthen one's control and control of one's own power, but it could also improve one's perception, making it more precise and sensitive. In short, there were only benefits and no disadvantages to having an enhanced consciousness. After putting away the purple star dragon flame, 3 black glows appeared in Chunzong's hand. Each one of them was as fine as sand. They were very fine, less than 1/3 the size of a grain of rice. If it was an external heart demon of the path manipulation realm, the refined essence would be even smaller. Chunzong had never absorbed the essence of the external heart demons before, so he didn't know how effective it would be. After absorbing the first external heart demon essence, it seemed to flow into his primordial spirit and nourish his consciousness. However, Chunzong didn't feel that half of the external heart demon essence was forcefully separated and merged with the black glows in the depths of his primordial spirit. It doesn't feel much. After absorbing all 3 external heart demon essences, Chunzong sensed them carefully and frowned slightly. The 3 external heart demon essences didn't bring much improvement to his consciousness. In fact, it didn't even increase it by a little. After all, Chunzong's consciousness was very strong. It was much stronger than cultivators of the same level. It would naturally be more difficult for him to improve it. However, Chunzong didn't know that only half of the 3 external heart demon essences were absorbed by his consciousness. The other half was absorbed by the core of the external heart demon in his primordial spirit. Of course, even if all of them were absorbed by Chunzong's consciousness, the improvement would be very limited. He still wouldn't feel it. However, these were only 3 external heart demon essences. If he could get more external heart demon essences and absorb more of them, perhaps his consciousness would be significantly strengthened and improved. For the first time, Chunzong desperately wanted to be attacked by external heart demons. Perhaps he was very lucky, or perhaps he was unlucky. In short, it didn't take long for another external heart demon to appear. This time, it was a dozen external heart demons that attacked directly. Great World Sword Technique, Boundless Earth. The 4th move of the Great World Sword Technique, which was also a move that Chunzong had comprehended before, was displayed instantly. With a swing of the sword light poured out like a waterfall. A rumbling sound was heard immediately. The sword chi turned into waves of earth and swept out as if the earth was shaking. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a piece of land more than 4,000 meters wide. It was filled with a turbid brown aura. Although it wasn't very big, it gave people a sense of boundless desolation. The dozen external heart demons were directly enveloped in the boundless land. The suppression power of this move was much stronger than that of the forest of 1,000 trees. Suppression. The dozen external heart demons couldn't move for a while. The brown turbid aura floating in the boundless land was also transformed by the sword chi. As it spread, it immediately caused severe damage to the dozen external heart demons. Chapter 2233. The earth-boundless sword covered the vast land. The earth was majestic and heavy, as if it was suppressing all living things. The dozen or so external heart demons could not move at all. With Chen Zong charging in, he was invincible. At that moment, Yi Ming and the other three could only watch. However, they had to attack soon because more external heart demons appeared and were blocked by them. With their abilities, they could defend against them. The attack of the external heart demons, this time, was more powerful than the previous one. Fight! The external heart demons, in their half-corporeal state, had shocking power. Every attack was extremely terrifying, and it even carried the power to attack one's mind and soul. One attack was a double threat, and it was very difficult to deal with. Yi Ming and the other three were experienced in dealing with it. They tried their best to avoid fighting the external heart demons head-on, because once they did, they could defend against the external heart demons' half-corporeal attacks. However, it would be difficult to defend against the other attack. It would shake one's mind and soul, and it would intensify the shaking of one's consciousness. The dozen or so external heart demons that were suppressed by the earth-boundless sword collapsed one after another under Chen Zong's sword. Their half-corporeal bodies shattered and dissipated, leaving behind a dozen or so illusory black shadows. They let out shrill shrieks like waves of sound waves, causing Chen Zong to frown slightly. Immediately, the external heart demon that was closest to him charged over like a ferocious ghost. It charged directly at Chen Zong's head, attempting to occupy Chen Zong's primordial spirit, invade his soul, devour his consciousness, and possess his body. However, the external heart demon did not succeed. Chen Zong sealed the external heart demon with a demon sealing spell. No matter how agile it was, Chen Zong's sword Dao territory captured all of its tracks clearly. Moreover, Chen Zong's primordial spirit had powerful senses. The second demon sealing spell was cast, and the second external heart demon was sealed. Then, the third external heart demon was sealed. The remaining external heart demons felt threatened. As they screamed, they turned into illusory black lights and charged out of the earth-boundless suppression, wanting to charge into the darkness. Chen Zong formed hand seals with both hands. 2 more demon sealing spells were cast, sealing 2 external heart demons. The remaining inner demons were even more alarmed. Although they were not very intelligent, they could instinctively judge the danger. 5 of their companions who had already been sealed felt that something was wrong and wanted to escape. When Chen Zong encountered the external heart devil for the first time, he was limited by his experience. But this time, he had a familiar feeling. With a flash, Chen Zong turned into a beam of sword light and chased after him. "Chief Guardian, don't be rash." Yi Ming's expression changed when he saw that, and he shouted immediately. But at that moment, Chen Zong chased after the remaining inner demons and disappeared into the darkness. As soon as he entered the darkness, Chen Zong immediately found that the remaining inner demons seemed to have disappeared. They were like small fish and shrimps that had entered the sea, hard to find. Sword Dao Domain, primordial spirit sensing. Suddenly, the surrounding darkness seemed to recede. Everything in the field of Sword Tao was within Chen Zong's perception. The escaping inner demons were all within Chen Zong's perception. Their trajectories were also captured by Chen Zong. The suppression of the field of Sword Tao slowed down the speed of those inner demons. Demon Sealing Spell. Following his perception, Chen Zong attacked again. Seal! 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 Under Chen Zong's pursuit, the remaining inner demons did not escape and were all sealed. 15. Chen Zong sealed a total of 15 external heart demons and obtained 15 balls of sealing black light. He put them away first and refined them into inner demon essence with a purple domain star dragon flame later. Since he had entered the darkness again, Chun Zong changed his mind. Not only did he not retreat, but he continued to go deeper. These external heart demons were not much of a threat to him. After all, he did not use his full strength in the battle earlier. He only attacked with his normal combat strength. Holding his sword and moving forward, Chun Zong's eyes flickered in the darkness. The night gave me a pair of black eyes, and I used them to see through the darkness. The Yuan underworld realm condensed the primordial spirit, and the primordial spirit was the condensation of all the essence of one's power. Not only could it completely control all the power in one's body, but it could also be more sensitive to the outside world. It was silent in the darkness. Vaguely, Chun-Zong heard a low, beast-like roar coming from afar. It was the sound of the half-corporeal external heart demons. Slightly delighted, Chun-Zong immediately sped up and went deeper. His eyes flickered, but it was difficult for him to see far. He could only rely on his field of sword Tao and primordial spirit to sense a few half-corporeal external heart demons that had entered his field of sword Tao. His sword struck. In the darkness, there seemed to be a sudden flash of light, and an external heart demon was immediately hit by the sword. Although the external heart demon had a half-corporeal body, it would not be seriously injured like a human. It would only weaken until it could no longer maintain its half-corporeal body and disintegrate. Chun-Zong's sword light contained extremely powerful sword qi. As soon as it entered the external heart demon's body, it immediately exploded and attacked everything. It immediately cut through the external heart demon's half-corporeal body and tore it into pieces. Kill, kill, kill. With a sword in hand, he was invincible. After destroying the external heart demon's half-corporeal body, Chun-Zong immediately formed a seal with his left hand and cast the demon sealing spell. Following an extremely mysterious trajectory, it was like the most agile butterfly, directly attacking the external heart demon and sealing it. Although it was difficult to see in the darkness, it could not stop Chun-Zong's sword. Like an elf in the dark, he danced with his sword. When all the roars and shrill screams disappeared, Chun-Zong sheathed his sword. It was because the external heart demon's attack had ended. If he wanted to kill and seal the external heart demon, he could only wait for the next opportunity. However, he did not know when it would be. However, this time, Chun-Zong sealed over 20 external heart demons. When he stepped out of the darkness, Yi Ming and the rest were already waiting. When they saw Chun-Zong's figure, they looked relieved after observing him carefully. Chun-Zong was safe and sound. Moreover, his expression, aura, and everything else showed that Chun-Zong was not invaded by the external heart demon. After being invaded by the external heart demon, one's expression and aura would undergo obvious changes in a short period of time. It was something that could not be hidden. It was also a kind of judgment. After refining over 20 external heart demons, Chun-Zong obtained over 20 external heart demon essences. After absorbing them, Chun-Zong did not feel any obvious increase in his consciousness. It was very subtle. When he opened his eyes, Chun-Zong could not help but look a little disappointed. It seemed like his plan to increase the strength of his consciousness with the external heart demon essences had failed. After all, after absorbing over 20 external heart demon essences, the effect of the increase was very weak. He could barely feel any increase. Even if there was, it was only a little, a very insignificant increase. According to such an increase, even if he absorbed 10 times more external heart demon essences, Chun-Zong estimated that the increase would be very limited. The expectation in his heart dropped a lot. Of course, if there was a chance to obtain more external heart demon essences, Chun-Zong would definitely not let it go. However, if he wanted to obtain external heart demon essences here, he could only wait for the external heart demons to take the initiative to attack. Or he could take the initiative to break into the mental demon realm. However, that would be like a sheep in a tiger's mouth. Even a Tao Lord powerhouse would not break into the mental demon realm unless it was a last resort. It was too dangerous. For some unknown reason, every year, there would be 1 or 2 waves of external heart demons attacking the 8th level of the mental demon cave. However, they were intercepted every time. They were not repelled. Instead, half of their physical bodies were broken and sealed by the demon sealing spell. After using and fighting again and again, the demon sealing spell improved rapidly and reached full mastery. Its power was stronger and more accurate. It could be said that it never missed. Yi Ming and the other 3 were very happy. With the help of Chen Zong, they had sealed many external heart demons. This was a harvest that they had not obtained in the past few decades. If Yi Ming had obeyed Chen Zong because of Chen Zong's powerful combat strength that surpassed his, he now had another reason to obey. His goal in becoming the Guardian Chief was nothing more than to gain more merit points. Now, he had gained more merit points than if he had been the Guardian Chief. Unfortunately, this kind of good time was always short-lived. This year was the 10th year. It was the 10th year since Chen Zong came to the 8th level of the mental demon cave. After this year, Chen Zong's guardian period would end. It was time for him to leave. The only thing that Chen Zong regretted was that although there were many external heart demons attacking him during the 10-year guardian period, they were not strong enough. He did not use all of his combat strength. In the darkness, a figure gradually walked over. It was getting faster and faster. Finally, it rushed out of the darkness and emitted an extremely terrifying aura. It was like a flood bursting through a dam or a mountain collapsing. It was a person. It was a person, but his expression was ferocious and cold. His eyes were filled with evil, killing intent. There seemed to be a layer of faint aura on his face. After he stepped out of the darkness, he was extremely fast, as if he was being chased by someone. His powerful aura also alerted Chen Zong, Yi Ming, and the rest. Senior Brotherly. Seeing that person, Yi Ming's expression changed drastically. Oh no, Senior Brotherly has been invaded by external heart demons. Guardian, Senior Brotherly is the guardian of the 9th level of the mental demon cave. He has 5-star combat strength, Yi Ming quickly said to Chen Zong. At the same time, Senior Brotherly, who was invaded by external heart demons, revealed a terrifying, ferocious expression. He approached in an instant. The terrifying killing intent turned into clouds of black energy that surged. Extremely terrifying demonic power surged, attacking and suppressing everything. Yi Ming and the other 3 could not help but tremble. The difference in combat strength made them feel like they were being attacked and suppressed by this pressure. Moreover, this pressure was demonic power. Cultivators who were invaded by external heart demons seemed to have lost their minds. However, they would unleash even more terrifying destructive power. In other words, their combat strength would increase to a certain extent. In contrast to Yi Ming and the other 3's solemn expressions, Chen Zong was eager to try. A gleam shot out of his eyes like a sword. Perhaps he could fight to his heart's content against a 5-star powerhouse who was invaded by external heart demons. Moreover, through some characteristics, he could tell that Senior Brother Li had not been invaded by external heart demons for a long time. He could still be saved. If he was invaded by external heart demons for a long time, the difficulty of saving him would increase greatly. It might even be impossible to save him. Therefore, Chen Zong could only regret that he could not enjoy this battle. Instead, he wanted to end it as soon as possible and defeat his opponent. Then let's go all out. Level 11 Internal Flame. Burn. Ling Wu Supreme Technique. In an instant, Chen Zong's combat strength skyrocketed. 5,000 meters Sword Dao territory. Great World Sword Technique, Boundless Earth. Chapter 2234. 10 years were up, and Chen Zong was leaving. Thank you for your cooperation in the past 10 years. Chen Zong cupped his hands at Yi Ming and the others. No, we should be the ones thanking you. Yi Ming and the other 3 were completely convinced by Chen Zong, and they were even extremely grateful. If it weren't for Chen Zong, they wouldn't have been able to obtain so many merits in 10 years. It directly surpassed the accumulation of the previous few decades. In the end, when Chen Zong defeated Senior Brother Li, who was guarding the 9th level of the Inner Demon Cave and possessed 5-star combat strength, the combat strength he displayed shocked Yi Ming and the others. Only then did Yi Ming realize that when Chun Zong fought with him 10 years ago, he had held back. One sword. Just one sword was enough to suppress Senior Brother Li. His combat strength was at least at the top of the 5-star level, or even higher. Chun Zong left and recommended Yi Ming to be the guardian of the 8th level of the Inner Demon Cave. When Yi Ming heard about it, he was naturally very grateful. The void was vast and boundless, and it was divided into 5 large areas: east, west, north, south, and central. Each area of the void had a top star sector sect, which was also called the Sacred Land. In other words, in theory, there were a total of 5 sacred lands in this area of the void. The sacred land in the central void was the Heavenly Palace. The sacred land in the northern void was the Eternal Battle Fort. The sacred land in the southern void was the Thousand Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain. As for the sacred land in the eastern void, it was called the Jiuan Purple Temple. As for the western void, there was no longer a sacred land because it had been destroyed many years ago. That battle swept across the western void and shook the entire void. The other 4 sacred lands and countless sect forces were also mobilized because the enemy in that battle was the foreign tribes. It was an alliance formed by many foreign tribes, and the battle was extremely intense. In the end, the foreign tribe alliance was scattered and retreated with heavy losses. The sacred land in the western void was the first to bear the brunt. The other race alliance was formed by many different races, and there was no lack of sovereign realm experts among them. Therefore, that battle was incomparably tragic, and there were countless casualties. In the end, although the alien race alliance was disbanded, the remnants of the alien race fled the western void to the outer realm. The western void's sacred ground was destroyed as a result. The entire sacred ground was almost destroyed and turned into ruins. That battle was too intense. It wasn't just one Dominator rank powerhouse who attacked with all their strength. Many Dominator rank powerhouses attacked with all their strength, causing the space-time of the sacred ground to tremble violently. In the end, it was surrounded by space-time storms, and no one could enter. Even Dominator rank powerhouses couldn't force their way in. However, the space-time storm would not be so strong all the time. It would have a period of exhaustion. When a space-time storm entered its exhaustion period, the spirit realm experts would have a chance to break through the space-time storm and enter the western void Holy Land ruins. Why did he have to enter? The reason was very simple. The war all those years ago was extremely intense, and there were countless casualties. More than half of them died within the ruins of the sacred grounds, so they naturally left behind numerous treasures, inheritances, and so on. Moreover, the Western Void's sacred ground ruins contained many treasures and inheritances, all of which were extremely tempting. This time, the space-time storm that surrounded the sacred ground ruins was about to enter its exhaustion period. It was time to enter again. Chun Zong had completed his first Taoist assessment task. The second task was to enter the Western Void Holy Land ruins and obtain one of the treasures. As long as he completed this task, Chun Zong would pass the assessment and become the third Taoist of the Heavenly Palace. The Western Void's original sacred ground was known as the Great Void Holy Gate. Now, only a huge ruin remained, and it was known as the Great Void Holy Gate Ruins. Chun Zongha and the group of experts from the Heavenly Palace used the Grand Universal Teleportation Array to travel from the Central Void to the Western Void. The Great Void Holy Ruins is just ahead. Let's go. The leader was an elder of the Heavenly Palace, a peak divinity realm expert. As the sound of his voice faded, he waved his hand, and a spaceship appeared. It was a peak-grade spaceship, and over 100 experts from the Heavenly Palace boarded it. The spaceship was activated, and the speed of the spaceship increased exponentially. Among the hundreds of people from the Heavenly Palace, the highest was Divinity Realm, the lowest was Tao Manipulation Realm, and some were even Yuan Underworld Realm. If it weren't for the fact that Tao Masters and Sovereigns couldn't enter, many Tao Masters and even Sovereigns would have made a move. However, the space-time storm was very special. Even if it was in its exhaustion period, once a Tao Master entered, the space-time storm would become chaotic and violent. When that happened, the Tao Master would be in great danger. If he was lucky, he would be thrown into the space-time turbulence and appear somewhere unknown. If he was lucky, he would be killed by the space-time storm. Even sovereigns couldn't escape such a fate. Therefore, every time the space-time storm of the Great Void Holy Ruins entered its exhaustion period, only Divinity Realm experts could pass through it. Strictly speaking, the Tao Manipulation Realm, Yuan Underworld Realm, and Divinity Realm experts were considered the lower levels of the Ascension Realm. Tao Masters were considered the middle levels of the Ascension Realm. There was a huge difference between them and the first three levels. In the Western Void, there were many void ships and even void ships flying past. Although they appeared from all directions, they were all heading towards the same destination: the Great Void Holy Ruins. The Great Void Holy Ruins was the ruins of the Great Void Holy Sect. It was a holy land of the Western Void. It was extremely powerful and had a deep foundation. There were also many treasures and inheritances. Cultivators who had entered the Great Void Holy Ruins and came out alive had more or less gained something. There were even some who had obtained some inheritances from the Great Void Holy Sect and improved by leaps and bounds, becoming famous experts in the Void. Because of this, every time the space-time storm outside the Great Void Divine Ruins entered a period of decline, it would attract countless imminent Divinity Realm cultivators from all directions and enter. Not only were there many rogue cultivators, but there were also many experts from various sects and forces. Even the experts from the four great holy lands would enter. The individual cultivators entered to change their own destinies. After all, compared to the disciples of the sect, the individual cultivator's path of cultivation was more bumpy. If they could obtain some treasures or inheritances, it would allow them to improve even more. The stronger they were, the more resources they could obtain. The strong would become stronger, and the weak would become weaker. This was almost an iron law. Of course, this did not mean that the weak would become even weaker. It was just that because they were weak, they could not obtain more resources and benefits, so their improvement was slow. On the other hand, because the strong were stronger, they could obtain more resources, so naturally, they could improve faster. As a result, the gap between the strong and the weak would continue to widen. A huge, fiery red spaceship that seemed to be burning with flames flew across the sky rapidly. The flames seemed illusory, but they emitted a shocking heat. It seemed to have ignited the void. Wherever it passed, it left a dazzling trail of fire. There were hundreds of people on the flaming spaceship. Looking at the insignia on their robes, it was a burning, sacred mountain. Innumerable divine, flame mountain. The three sacred weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect have not been found yet. This time, we have to find at least one of them. The eyes of an expert from Innumerable Divine Flame Mountain seemed to be burning. His tone was also filled with a blazing aura. If Chun Zong saw these people, he would definitely realize that Yu Tianfeng, who had been defeated by his sword, was also present. Of course, Yu Tianfeng was not the only familiar face. In another direction, in the Eastern Void, there was also a huge, top-grade spaceship. The spaceship was purple in color and gave off an extremely heavy feeling. It was like a person with steel muscles all over his body. It was extremely visually impactful. This was the spaceship of the Eastern Void Holy Land, Jiyuan Purple Hall. According to my calculations, the three sacred weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect might appear this time. We have to get at least one of them. A tall and muscular elder said in a deep voice. His voice was buzzing and seemed to shake the void. West of the Western Void was the boundary of the extraterritorial void. It was also the habitat of hundreds of foreign tribes. At this moment, a huge, strange-looking flying object that looked like a huge sea urchin was flying into the Western Void at an alarming speed. It was heading in the direction of the Great Void Holy Ruins. In the black flying object that looked like a huge sea urchin, there were dozens of creatures that did not look like humans. Some of them were covered in fish scales, some looked like ferocious beasts, and some looked very similar to humans. However, their skin was darker, their ears were slender, and their eyes were extremely sharp. Some of them even had an extra eye in the middle of their brows. The foreign tribes. These dozens of them were all foreign tribes. Each of them had a powerful aura. Their goal was obviously to enter the Great Void Holy Ruins. On the spaceship of the Will Heavenly Palace, hundreds of elders and true disciples of the Will Heavenly Palace gathered together. According to my calculations, the 3 sacred weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect might appear this time. The elder with the strongest combat strength said unhurriedly, "Our main mission is to obtain one of the 3 sacred weapons. Of course, it would be best if we could obtain one of the 3 sacred weapons." True disciple Chun, this is also related to your Taoist assessment. If you can obtain one of the 3 sacred weapons, you should be able to become a Taoist when you return to the Heavenly Palace. If not, I'm afraid you'll have to change your mission, the elders said to Chunzong. Chunzong nodded to show that he understood. This assessment mission was no doubt very difficult. The 3 sacred weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect were the 3 most powerful sacred weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect. To be honest, Chunzong did not have much confidence in obtaining one. Rest assured, true disciple Chun, this old man will definitely lend you a helping hand. A Divinity Realm elder smiled at Chunzong. That's right. The competition this time will be very fierce. We're not the only ones who want the 3 sacred weapons. However, true disciple Chun, we'll do our best to help you. The others also expressed their stance. This was a show of goodwill to Chunzong. After all, Chunzong was qualified to become a Taoist. Once he became a Taoist, Chunzong's status would rise, and he would be above most elders, second only to Tao Master. It's a pity. Back then, the Great Void Sect had a World Divine Tree. However, the World Divine Tree was destroyed in that great battle. An elder suddenly sighed. The World Divine Tree. Chapter 2235. In the center of the Western Void, there was a black storm that swept endlessly. The storm seemed to be sweeping from top to bottom to top, from left to right, and from right to left. It felt like it was from the inside out, yet also from the outside in. It was contradictory and peculiar. The black storm looked like a small ball, only the size of a fist. However, at a closer look, it seemed to be infinitely huge, as if it was boundless and filled the entire void. The aura emitted by the black storm was incomparably violent and mysterious. It felt like it was isolated from the world, as if it could pierce through the past and the future. Space-time storm. This was the space-time storm outside the Great Void Ruins. The black space-time storm seemed to contain some kind of great terror, like the mouth of a void beast that could swallow everything. One after another, spaceships flew over from afar. They stopped outside the space-time storm, several tens of thousands of meters away. They did not dare to get too close, as they might be caught up in the space-time storm if they got too close. The space-time storm that had not truly entered its period of decline was extremely terrifying. Even if a sovereign was swept in, there was a high chance of death. Even if they did not die, they would be severely injured. Is this the space-time storm? It's really amazing. In the past, I would take a few glances every time I passed by. Unfortunately, I had no chance to enter. However, this time, I finally have a chance. Many people stared at the pitch-black storm with shining eyes. Even if it had entered its period of decline, Tao Masters and Sovereigns could not enter. Therefore, only Tao Manipulation Realm, Yuanming Realm, and Divinity Realm cultivators could enter. Of course, the difference in strength between Tao Manipulation Realm, Yuanming Realm, and Divinity Realm was huge. Tao Manipulation Realm cultivators could not fight back against Divinity Realm cultivators. Similarly, Yuanming Realm cultivators could not fight back against Divinity Realm cultivators. In theory, if Divinity Realm cultivators entered, Yuanming Realm cultivators and Tao Manipulation Realm cultivators would not be able to compete with Divinity Realm cultivators. After all, they would not even be able to escape if they found any treasures. However, that was not the case. First of all, the Great Void Ruins was huge and vast. After all, before the Great Void Holy Gate was destroyed, it was made up of many stars. The Heavenly Palace was located in the original realm's black and white world, while the Eternal Battle Fort was a battle fort formed from ancient stars and superstars. The myriad tribulation divine flame mountain was a gigantic flaming mountain. The size of the flaming mountain was larger than an ancient star, and there were countless mountain peaks within it. The Great Void Holy Gate, on the other hand, was formed by powerful cultivators who moved 1,080 stars to form a formation. With an ancient star as the center, a heaven-defying formation was set up, causing the 1,080 stars to be as close to each other as possible, pulling each other along. The formation of this space-time storm had a lot to do with the Great Void Inverse Dimensional Turbulence Grand Formation of the Great Void Divine Sect. The Great Battle Back, then, was incomparably tragic. Naturally, the Great Void Inverse Yuan Space Disrupting Grand Formation was also destroyed. It mixed with all the violent and chaotic energy and eventually became the Great Void Immortal Ruins of today. Therefore, the Great Void Divine Ruins within the space-time storm was extremely vast. Even a Tao Manipulation Realm cultivator might not necessarily encounter a Yuan Ming or Divinity Realm cultivator. Of course, it wouldn't be a big deal if they were unlucky enough to encounter one. Another point was that the energy within the Great Void Divine Ruins was chaotic. Some places even sealed one's cultivation base. Once one entered, it didn't matter if one was a Tao Manipulation Realm cultivator, Yuan Ming, or Divinity Realm cultivator. It was all the same. It was precisely because of this that Ascension Realm cultivators of different cultivation bases were given the opportunity to enter. After all, the Great Void Divine Ruins was so big and there were so many seals. One might not necessarily encounter someone whose cultivation base was much higher than one's own. Even if one did encounter such a person, one might still have a chance of escaping through the seals. Of course, there were many dangers within the Great Void Divine Ruins. The dangers brought by powerful cultivators entering were only a part of it. The void spaceships of the powerful forces, such as the Star Sector level forces, were custom-made. They all had unique appearances and markings. Therefore, at a glance, one could tell which force they came from. It was clear whether one could offend them or not. A void spaceship with a black bottom and a white top that had a distinct and harmonious appearance flew over at an astonishing speed. It was silent, as if it was shuttling through the inner layers of the void. Black and white, white on top and black on the bottom. This is the void spaceship of the Heavenly Will Palace. In an instant, many people's expressions changed and their eyes widened. The Heavenly Will Palace, the strongest in the void, the number one sacred ground. Although the Eternal Battle Fort, the Great Void Holy Sect, and the Eternal Battle Fort were all sacred grounds that were on par with the Heavenly Will Palace, and in terms of overall strength, they were not much weaker than the Heavenly Will Palace. Of course, being number one was always more impressive. Even the Heavenly Will Palace is here. What's so strange about that? I heard that the three Great Void Divine Treasures might appear this time. The Heavenly Will Palace must be here for them. This time, I think it's not just the Heavenly Will Palace. The Eternal Battle Fort, the Great Void Holy Sect, and the Great Void Holy Sect will be here too. After all, the three Great Void Divine Treasures were very attractive. The three Great Void Divine Treasures were the supreme divine treasures of the Great Void Holy Sect. They had unfathomable power, and during the war against the foreign tribes, they had killed countless of them. Although the Heavenly Will Palace, the Eternal Battle Fort, the Eternal Battle Fort, the Eternal Battle Fort, the Eternal Battle Fort, the Great Void Holy Sect, and the Great Void Holy Sect had similar divine treasures, no one would complain about having a few more. Even if it was just one more, it would be a great thing. For a moment, everyone's hearts sank. This was especially so for the itinerant cultivators and those from the smaller factions. Their goal was to enter the Great Void Holy Ruins to search for opportunities. As for the three Great Void Divine Treasures, they didn't even dare to dream about it. But now it seemed like it was impossible to avoid it. As expected, a void ship burning with flames flew over. It was powerful and domineering, as if it could ignite the void. It was a shocking sight. On the other side, a purple void ship that looked like a giant steel beast flew over. Its domineering and violent power repelled the void, as if it wanted to force everything back. The Great Void Holy Sect. The Great Void Holy Sect. Not long after, a void ship that shone with countless lights and emitted an eternal aura of heaven and earth flew over. Its aura was extremely powerful, as if its battle intent was soaring to the sky. Sensing it from afar, those with lower cultivation levels immediately felt their battle intent being drawn to it. The Eternal Battle Fort. The people from the 4 Great Void Holy Grounds were all present. In the distance, a dark stream of light was approaching and slowly decelerating. A huge aircraft that looked like a black sea urchin appeared in front of everyone. It had a different style and a different aura. Immediately, the cultivators looked over and felt that the aura was very strange. That aura, Shenzong frowned. The foreign tribes. An elder from the Heavenly Will Palace said. The foreign tribes? Shenzong frowned slightly. He wasn't sure. Weren't the foreign tribes in the extraterritorial void? And they were driven out by the human race. Why would they dare to come in? Although the human race won the great battle back then, we suffered great losses. The foreign tribes were driven back and suffered even greater losses. They had no choice but to leave the Western Void and go to the more dangerous extraterritorial void. The elder immediately explained. After that, the foreign tribes tried to regroup a few times and tried to invade the Western Void again, but they were driven back by the human race. Both sides suffered casualties. In the end, they signed an agreement to not invade each other. Shenzong nodded thoughtfully. The agreement clearly states that the human race can enter the extraterritorial void to train, and the foreign tribes can enter the void to train as well. However, the conditions are not to overdo it and not to deliberately cause damage. Now that the foreign tribes were here, it was obvious that they were here for the Great Void Ruins. Under the agreement, the human race couldn't deliberately target them. Of course, after entering the Great Void Ruins, there would be competition. What would happen then was another matter. After all, deliberately targeting was a relatively vague way of saying. As the space-time storm swept over, it gradually became more violent. Even from tens of thousands of meters away, one could feel the terrifying aura fluctuation. It was as if it was going to destroy everything. Everyone's expression changed, and they were fearful. Even the Divinity Realm experts were fearful. However, after reaching its peak, the violent and destructive space-time storm began to weaken. When a space-time storm was weakened to the extreme, it finally stopped and maintained a low level of stability. It was time to enter the space-time storm. Immediately, one figure after another broke free from the spatial battleship and flew towards the pitch-black space-time storm. When entering the space-time storm, the larger one's body, the greater the impact of the storm. Therefore, they couldn't use spaceships to enter directly. After all, spaceships were at least 1,000 meters long and only 1 or 2 meters long. The difference was too great. Even if the space-time storm was in its weakened state, once a spaceship entered, the impact would be very terrifying. The spaceship could be torn apart by the space-time storm, and even the people on board would be injured. Therefore, the best way to enter was to enter by oneself. The smaller one's body, the smaller the contact area with the space-time storm. Naturally, the impact will be less. Follow closely. The strongest elder of the Will Heavenly Palace shouted as he took the lead, charging straight into the pitch-black space-time storm. Shenzong also entered and immediately felt a strong force attacking him from all directions. The force was very strange, and he couldn't determine which direction it would come from. The force was very crazy and violent, and it kept attacking his body restlessly, as if it wanted to tear him into countless pieces. However, this force had already weakened to a certain extent and wasn't much of a threat to him as a Yuan underworld expert. If he was in the Tao manipulation realm, he would have to resist with all his strength. Otherwise, he could be injured if he wasn't careful. Since the people of the Will Heavenly Palace moved, the other factions and unaffiliated cultivators naturally wouldn't wait. Dozens of foreign tribes left their spaceships and rushed into the space-time storm. Chapter 2236. Happy National Day, everyone. Good food, good drink, and fun. The space-time storm raged and never stopped. No one knew what kind of mystery it contained. Even sovereign-level powerhouses found it difficult to find out. It had become an unsolved mystery. Ever since the destruction of the Great Void Divine Gate and the appearance of the space-time storm, it had been raging and had never dissipated. There were only occasional periods of exhaustion, but it would recover after a period of time. Fortunately, the space-time storm would not spread. Otherwise, the Western Void would have been affected and the entire Void would be in danger. Groups of imminent divinity cultivators shuttled through the space-time storm. Some of them looked old and feeble, but that was only their appearance. For imminent divinity cultivators, whether they looked old or young did not have much effect on their strength. It was just that some people broke through earlier, so they looked younger. Some people broke through later, so they looked older. Of course, some people liked to maintain a youthful appearance, while others liked to look old. The void was so big, and there were countless humans with all kinds of hobbies. It was not surprising that they looked like this. The space-time storm was very vast and was over 10,000 miles thick. After entering it, even the speed of imminent divinity cultivators was greatly restricted. They could not be as fast as they were in the void. Of course, even if they were restricted, their speed was not something that Yuan Ming cultivators and Dao manipulation cultivators could compare to. After all, everyone's speed and movements were restricted here. Imminent divinity cultivators did not need to move with others and did not need to wait. They could move forward at full speed and cross the space-time storm before others to enter the Great Void Divine Ruins. On the contrary, imminent divinity cultivators of sects and factions had to carry other Yuan Ming and Dao manipulation cultivators of their own sections. They had to control their own speed, so they were slower. However, when they entered thousands of miles, an unforeseen event occurred. There seemed to be a constant whistling sound in their ears. It was like the roar of a gust of wind blowing. Everyone could not help but tense up and feel a chill all over their bodies. In an instant, Chunzong felt the pulling force around him become more chaotic. Then a black wind swept over. The figure of his fellow sect member who was flying in front of him seemed to have escaped into a space-time black hole and disappeared. This scene made Chunzong's pupils constrict. The howling of the wind was incessant, and then gusts of black wind blew past. Anyone caught in the wind was unable to resist, and this was the case even for transcendent experts. They vanished as if they had been sucked into a space-time black hole. But in the next moment, they would appear very far away without any pattern, in front and around them. The people from the heavenly palace disappeared one after another. Gradually, a gust of black wind blew towards Chunzong. Chunzong's strong perception allowed him to capture the black wind, but Chunzong found that he could not dodge it. No matter what he did, he could not avoid the attack of the black wind. It was as if it had locked onto him. In an instant, Chunzong felt as if he was being blown by his own black wind. His whole body seemed to be wrapped up. The feeling was very strange and unique. It was as if he was being carried by an inexplicable force into the depths of time and space. Darkness. All Chunzong could see was darkness. It was so dark that he could not see anything. He even lost all his senses. In this darkness, Chunzong did not know how much time had passed. Suddenly, he felt a strong force attacking him. He flung himself out of the darkness and reappeared in the space-time storm. However, he could no longer see his fellow sect members and elders from the heavenly palace. The plan to act together had been disrupted. The discussion on the void spaceship had naturally come to an end. Of course, if they met along the way, they could join forces. After all, if he wanted to find and seize the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void, he alone was not enough. He would do his best. After all, this was related to his test for the Taoist. Of course, if he failed, he would have to take on other tests. The number of times a Taoist could fail a test was 3. If he failed more than 3 times, he would not be a Taoist. Chunzong had not failed yet. Of course, It would be best if he did not fail. He kept flying forward. As he flew, Chunzong saw a different scenery through the space-time storm. In the next moment, Chunzong's figure rushed out of the space-time storm. In an instant, he felt that all the binding force had disappeared. What appeared before him was a gray world that stretched as far as the eye could see. Vast, vast, sinking, ruins. An indescribable feeling passed through Chunzong's eyes and directly attacked Chunzong's spiritual will. Chunzong's mind was greatly shaken. The gray sky, the gray earth, the gray world, the countless collapsed palaces, and the broken walls formed a vast and boundless ruin. In the middle, there were some pitch-black void zones connected. They seemed to contain terrible danger, as if they were going to devour everything. This feeling was as if he had entered a world full of life and vitality into a world full of deathly stillness and despair. This kind of aura would make people feel uncontrollably oppressed. Chunzong could even clearly feel that the aura here was very chaotic and heterogeneous. There were at least hundreds of different auras. Moreover, the power of the Great Path was also very chaotic. It constantly collided and stirred up countless ripples. Chunzong's body was falling. Perhaps it was because of the chaotic power here, it was difficult to maintain flight. Although he was falling, Chunzong did not lose control or balance. Instead, he maintained a certain speed as he descended. As he was falling, a pitch-black crack suddenly appeared. It was very sudden. Chunzong was very alert. He reacted quickly and immediately dodged. He was almost affected by the spatial crack. That was not an ordinary spatial crack, but a space-time crack. It was of a higher level and more dangerous than a spatial crack. Chunzong, who was falling, found that the higher the altitude, the more frequent the space-time cracks would appear. The lower the altitude, the more stable it was. But stability did not mean that there would not be any space-time cracks, only that there would be fewer of them. There were no other people from the Heavenly Wool Palace around. There were other cultivators, but the closest one was tens of thousands of meters away. With Chunzong's eyesight, he could see them clearly. It was an old man with a cultivation of the path manipulation realm. He should be a rogue cultivator. A sudden change occurred, and a pitch-black crack appeared. The old man's perception was far inferior to Chunzong's, and in an instant, one of the old man's legs was affected. Without him noticing, the leg was swallowed up and completely disappeared. My leg. When the pitch-black crack disappeared, the old man felt that his left leg had disappeared. It was empty. He could not help but scream. He lost his balance and fell quickly like a meteorite. In the blink of an eye, the old man turned into a small black dot in Chunzong's eyes. Chunzong did not help because he did not know the old man at all. Besides, it was dangerous here. If he was not careful, he could encounter a space-time crack. Chunzong could not put himself in danger to save someone he did not know. Of course, if it was not too dangerous and not too troublesome, Chunzong would not hesitate to help. After all, since he wanted to enter this place, he had to be prepared to encounter all kinds of dangers. He even had to be prepared to die. The Great Void Ruins was not only a place full of opportunities, but also a place full of danger. Sometimes one would not even know how they got hurt or how they died. Maintaining a uniform speed, Chunzong spread out his field of swordway. His perception was also raised to the extreme. After avoiding several space-time cracks, he successfully landed. Under his feet was the ruins of a collapsed palace. Broken walls and broken tiles piled up. The barren aura was very strong, as if it had been settled for countless years. Indeed, it had been settled for countless years. It had been countless years since the invasion of the Alien Alliance, a fierce battle that had lasted for hundreds of years. There was no specific pattern for the space-time storm to enter its period of exhaustion. Therefore, until now, the Great Void Ruins have been opened less than 100 times. Even though there were many people who entered every time the Great Void Ruins opened and obtained many opportunities, there were simply too many opportunities in the Great Void Ruins. What was obtained was only a small portion. Even if one entered 100 times, they would not be able to obtain all the opportunities in the Great Void Ruins. After all, there was a time limit every time it opened. Within the limited time, one had to face many dangers. It was very difficult to obtain many opportunities. After all, only a small part of the people who entered the Great Void Ruins could leave alive and obtain good opportunities. The rest either died in there or did not obtain much. Shinzong did not act immediately. Instead, he looked into the distance, determined the direction, and compared it with what he saw in the sky. He projected it in the deity ocean using his consciousness. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it was a miniature version of the ruins. After determining the direction and thinking, Chunzong adjusted his body and took a step forward. He was not very fast, but not very slow either. He maintained a uniform speed as he moved forward. The field of Sword Wei covered a radius of 1,000 meters. It was not fully extended, so his energy consumption was lower. Under the perception of his primordial spirit, everything around him was under Chunzong's control. However, Chunzong sighed again. Originally, he was going to move together with his brothers and elders from the Heavenly Intention Palace. In the end, such an unforeseen event happened, and he became alone again. As expected, I am more suited to move alone. Chunzong could not help but sigh. However, moving alone was not a bad thing. While traveling together with the elders and senior brothers of the Heavenly Will Palace would ensure their safety, they would still have less freedom and flexibility to do so. Since his debut, he had been moving alone most of the time. Even if he occasionally joined forces with others, most of the time he would move alone. He was already used to it. Chapter 22:37. Here, the aura was barren and chaotic. There were ruins everywhere after a fierce battle. The name of the ruins was true to its name. Although there were many opportunities in the Great Void Divine Ruins, it was not something that could be obtained just by entering. Perhaps such a situation would occur during the first opening. However, the opportunities that were easy to obtain had long been taken away by others during the first few dozen openings. Now, if one wanted to obtain any treasures or inheritances, they had to search for them. There were still many places that had not been explored. Chunzong saw a huge skeleton that was more than 1,000 meters tall. The skeleton was gray and covered with fine cracks. It exuded an ancient aura of death and desolation. From the remaining aura, Chunzong could determine that this skeleton must have been very powerful when it was alive. Unfortunately, it was now just a rotten skeleton. Not only were there the rotten skeletons of skeletal beasts, but Chunzong also saw the shriveled corpses of humans. They were also rotten and did not leave anything behind. Even if there was anything left, it would have been taken away by others. Some of the skeletons and dried corpses were complete, while others were incomplete. In addition, there were also some broken and decaying divine items that had lost all power. They were not taken away because there was no value in retrieving them. No matter how magnificent you were when you were alive, you could not withstand the erosion of time. Chunzong stared at the rotten corpse in front of him and could not help but sigh. His sighs seemed to echo with the wind in the desolate ruins. There were humans and foreign clans among the skeletons. As for what kind of foreign clans they were, one thing was for sure: they were very powerful when they were alive. They were even more powerful than he was now. However, they had all become dried bones and dry corpses. No matter how powerful they were when they were alive, they could not withstand the erosion of time. For a moment, Chunzong's eyes flashed with a hint of confusion, but it was only for a moment. The confusion immediately dissipated and was pierced, torn, and shattered by a ray of light that was as sharp as a sword. You could not withstand the erosion of time because you were not strong enough. The light in Chunzong's eyes became sharper. If you were strong enough, you would be so strong that even time could not do anything to you. That was right. You would die because you were not strong enough. After you died, you would become a dried corpse under the erosion of time because you were not strong enough. If he was strong enough, others would be the ones to die. With this thought in mind, Chunzong's eyes became sharper and brighter, as if they could pierce through time and space. The haze and confusion that had just appeared in his heart disappeared without a trace. With a single stride, Qinzong passed by the corpse that knelt on the ground, and his footsteps became even firmer. Moreover, a type of grand aura was faintly condensing silently on his body, causing his aura to become even more condensed. Strong. Qinzong's belief was very simple, and that was to become stronger. As long as he was strong enough, all the conspiracies would be useless, and all resistance would be futile. No one could kill him, but they would be the ones to die. Become stronger. Enhance. He was stronger than anyone else, so strong that even time and space could not erase him. Qinzong reached out and pulled out a long sword from the broken wall. The body of the sword was mottled and covered with rust, and its aura was deathly still. With a slight shake, cracks immediately appeared on the sword. Qinzong was a little disappointed after a slight inspection. As expected, it was no longer able to hold on. Just like those powerful cultivators, it could not withstand the erosion of time. Of course, it was also related to the environment here. Surrounded by the space-time storm, the aura of the outside world could not enter at all. The aura inside was chaotic and heterogeneous. Without the nourishment of the relatively pure void yuan qi, the divine weapons, and so on would naturally gradually lose their spirituality and power and eventually decay. If that's the case, what about the three great void divine weapons? Qinzong could not help but frown slightly as he pondered. Although godly artifacts were powerful, they also needed to be nourished by pure energy in order to maintain their power. Being isolated for a short period of time was not a big deal. Even if they would slowly lose their power, as long as they were not damaged, they could be nourished and restored. It was just a matter of time. There were even some secret techniques that could restore the power of a divine weapon in a short period of time without any side effects. However, ever since Qinzong entered the Great Void Divine Ruins, all the divine weapons that he had seen, whether they were broken or intact, had all decayed and lost all their power. They were useless and turned into scrap metal. Even if he brought them out, they would at most be treated as antiques. If these divine weapons were like that, then what about the three Great Void Divine Weapons? Even though the three Great Void Divine Weapons were known as the supreme divine weapons of the Great Void Holy Sect and possessed mysterious and incredible power, they were still within the category of divine weapons. Once they were deprived of the nourishment of pure energy for a long period of time, in a place like the Great Void Ruins where energy was chaotic and heterogeneous, their power would continue to be lost. Then, after so many years, would the power of the three Great Void Divine Weapons have also been lost? Would they become like the long sword in his hand? If so, then it would be meaningless. But thinking back, the experts of Will Heavenly Palace must have thought of this. This was not a small matter, but a big one. They should not have overlooked it. But they still wanted to find the three Great Void Divine Weapons. This meant that even if their power was lost, the three Great Void Divine Weapons would not be damaged fundamentally. Or even if they were damaged, they could still be restored. Suddenly, Qinzong felt that he was overthinking. The experts of Will Heavenly Palace must have thought of this, but he did not need to think too much. Once he entered this place, he would do his best to find the three Great Void Divine Weapons, and at least get one of them. Other than that, he would look for treasures or opportunities that were useful to him, and do his best to improve himself. Otherwise, it would be meaningless to risk entering this place. With a casual toss, Qinzong threw away the long sword in his hand and continued forward. His eyes were extremely sharp. It had been at least 4 to 6 hours since he entered. Although it was difficult to feel the passage of time, Qinzong had not found any treasure so far. There were only some skeletons and divine weapons that were as broken as scrap metal. Suddenly, Qinzong retracted his foot. He was a little surprised. He took another step forward to test the waters. Immediately, he felt the difference in gravity. After careful observation, Qinzong found that the light in the area ahead seemed to be dimmer. But if one did not look carefully, it would be hard to notice. Twice. The gravity in this area was twice as strong as the gravity outside. Qinzong walked in. Other than the fact that the gravity was twice as strong as the outside, he did not discover anything else. There were no treasures or inheritances. It was just an abnormal phenomenon caused by the collapse of the Great Void inverse Yuan space turbulence grand formation. This was not the first time such an anomaly occurred. Then, Chunzong found another anomaly besides the difference in gravity. That was the flow of time. In some areas, the flow of time was double or even triple that of the outside world. In other words, one breath outside was 2 or even 3 breaths in the abnormal area. Undoubtedly, such a place was the most suitable for cultivation. Thinking about it, a faster flow of time than the outside world meant more time for cultivation than others. But it was a pity that the auras in the abnormal areas with the flow of time were weaker and more heterogeneous. It was not conducive to the improvement of one's cultivation, nor was it conducive to understanding the mysteries of the great Tao. The only thing that could be considered useful was understanding the abhijna. After all, the flow of time was different. Understanding the abhijna was mainly about understanding, not practicing. Of course, if one was in a place where the qi of vitality was rich and pure, and the mysteries of the great Tao were clear, the effect would be better. It would often be twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, these places where the flow of time was doubled, tripled, or even tripled were useless. After that, Chunzong found other abnormal areas. After entering, his qi cultivation was directly affected. It was difficult to use it, and he retained his body refinement strength. There were other abnormal areas that affected his body refinement cultivation, but did not affect his qi cultivation. In short, there were many strange phenomena in the Great Void Divine Ruins. However, Chunzong estimated that a day had passed, and he had not found any opportunities. It was clearly inconsistent with the rumors in the outside world that there were treasures everywhere. During this time, Chunzong only met one cultivator. They were about a few thousand meters apart. When the other party saw Chunzong, he immediately changed direction and moved further away. He was very vigilant, as if he was afraid that Chunzong would attack him. In this regard, Chunzong did not say anything. Under normal circumstances, if others did not attack him, he would not take the initiative to attack others. However, Chunzong could understand that person's actions. After all, it looked like that person was a lone cultivator in the path manipulation realm. A lone cultivator in the path manipulation realm could be considered lucky to be able to enter this place. Naturally, he would be more careful and cautious. He kept moving forward. After passing through a mostly collapsed palace, there was darkness. It was a darkness like a void. There was no light, no aura, and it was quiet and dead. This was also one of the dark areas that Chunzong saw when he fell from the sky. After passing through this dark area, he would naturally enter the next area of ruins. The Great Void Ruins was a general term, but it was made up of tens of thousands of ruins. They were either directly connected to each other or separated by dark areas. After all, the Great Void Holy Gate was formed by the Great Void Yuan inverse, space-twisting formation arranged by 1,080 stars. The entire Great Void Holy Gate was a great formation, and that great formation represented the Great Void Holy Gate. Back then, the Great Void Holy Gate was best at formations. Whether it was ordinary or void-level formations, the Great Void Holy Gate was the best at them. Back then, the 5 great holy grounds of the void each had their own areas of expertise. The Ru-E Heavenly Palace mainly cultivated the power of the mind. For example, the Thousand Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain was a flame superpower. For example, the Eternal Battle Fort was a variety of battle techniques. For example, the Jiuan Ziji Hall was very good at body refinement. Of course, qi cultivation was not inferior, and the Great Void Holy Gate was best at formations. Chapter 2238. Within the Great Void Immortal Ruins, there were tens of thousands of pieces of ruins of various sizes scattered all over the place. They were formed by the destruction of the stars, but were unable to escape the restraints of the Great Void Inverse Dimensional Disruption spell formation. They collided and turned into pieces of land, forming the ruins. If one were to look down from the highest altitude, they would realize that the tens of thousands of pieces of ruins were distributed from the outermost area to the innermost area. They were like stars surrounding the moon. There was only one piece of ruins in the center, and it was also the largest piece. Every time the great void, immortal ruins opened, everyone would first arrive at the outermost area of the ruins. Therefore, if there were any treasures or opportunities in the outermost area of the ruins, they would have been taken away by the people who entered before them. Even if there were any treasures left behind, they would be dug up every time they came. Therefore, Chunzong passed by 3 pieces of ruins and did not find anything. Of course, Chunzong only flew past them and did not search carefully. In general, even if there were any treasures in the outermost area of the ruins, they would not be too good. Furthermore, the opening time of the Great Void Immortal Ruins was limited. They could not waste time on the outermost area, so they had to go as deep as possible. If they found anything valuable along the way, it would not be too late to take it away. Moreover, Chunzong felt that the 3 Great Void holy treasures were unlikely to appear in the outermost area. They should be in the innermost area. This was a logical line of thought, but it was hard to say whether this was the case. Chunzong passed through the pitch-black void and entered the 4th piece of ruins. Chunzong saw another mummy. Chunzong did not deliberately remember which mummy this was. However, this mummy was different from the mummies and skeletons from before. There was something in his hand. It was a shuttle-shaped object. The shuttle-shaped object was about as thick as a child's arm and about a foot long. It was covered with lines and lines. It was a dull silver color, as if it was covered in dust. In a flash, Chunzong stretched out his left hand slightly and grabbed the air like a dragon stretching out its claws. The dim silver shuttle in the mummy's hand suddenly flew up and fell into Chunzong's hand. Of course, to be on the safe side, Chunzong's palm was covered with a layer of power to prevent any accidents from happening. When he held the shuttle in his hand, he felt it was slightly heavy, as if he was holding a 1,000-kilogram object. Of course, this weight was nothing to Chunzong. Chunzong observed it carefully and sensed it with his primordial spirit. He found that the structure of this object was somewhat strange. It was somewhat different from those divine artifacts he had seen before. The crisscrossing patterns gave off an indescribable sense of mystery. Formation artifacts, Chunzong said. This was what the Transcendent Realm Elders had said on the spatial ship. The Great Void Holy Sect was best at formations. They also dabbled in the art of forging weapons. It could be said that formations were the Great Void Holy Sect's main cultivation, while forging weapons was secondary. The divine artifacts forged by the Great Void Holy Sect were also known as formation artifacts by the outside world. They were unique divine artifacts that belonged only to the Great Void Holy Sect. The reason why they were called formation artifacts was because they were different from other divine artifacts. Of course, formation artifacts were also divine artifacts. Hence, they were collectively known as divine artifacts. For example, the 3 Great Void divine artifacts. However, the 3 Great Void divine artifacts could also be called the 3 Great Void formation artifacts. As this thought flashed through his mind, Chunzong carefully studied the shuttle in his hand. He was increasingly certain that this was the Great Void formation artifact of the Great Void Holy Sect. As for what he had seen before, they were all normal divine artifacts. Their forging methods were obviously different from those of the Great Void formation artifacts. Chunzong did not know much about formation artifacts. This was the first time he had seen one. Hence, he was unsure whether the shuttle in his hand was good or bad. In that case, he would give it a try. He tried to infuse his own Taichu sword essence into it. He felt the shuttle in his hand tremble slightly. The mysterious patterns on it seemed to light up. However, the speed was very slow. It was as if there was something blocking it. He could feel heavy resistance. Chunzong increased the output and infusing of his Taichu sword essence. More patterns lit up. When all the patterns were lit up, it was as if dust had been wiped away. The dim silver also became brighter. It was faintly resplendent. Chunzong could feel that there was a power gradually awakening within the shuttle. It was as if it was awakened by his own power. It was as if it was waking up from a deep slumber. TSK, TSK, TSK. Ear-piercing sounds rang out. Streaks of silver-white electric arcs spread out from within the shuttle. They flickered and leaped, emitting a dazzling light. Go! With a silent command, Chunzong waved his hand. Immediately, a streak of silver-white electric light shot out from the shuttle. It was like a silver thunderbolt. It was very dazzling. It carried with it terrifying power. It tore through the air at an astonishing speed. With a boom, a broken wall was directly hit. It was instantly destroyed and turned into dust. Streaks of silver light flickered in the air. This power is almost equivalent to the combat strength of the 10-star Tao manipulation realm. Chunzong thought to himself. Although it was not bad, it was useless to him. After all, his combat strength had long surpassed the Tao manipulation realm. However, Chunzong also discovered that the formation artifact was not complete, or rather, it was damaged. Perhaps that was why it was not powerful enough. However, Chunzong felt that even if the formation artifact was complete, it would not be as powerful as him. This thing was better than nothing. Chunzong put it away. With a flash, he passed by the mummy and continued forward. Chunzong also gradually discovered that the deeper he went into the ruins of God, the more chaotic the aura was. It was more disadvantageous for cultivation. Fortunately, he had prepared enough pills. As the fifth true disciple of Exian Palace, who had also received the title of Unparalleled Divine Sword and was ranked first on the Divine Tablet of Exian Palace, regardless of whether or not he could pass the Taoist test, there was no doubt that Chunzong's talent was undeniable. Naturally, it would be taken care of. Passing through the fourth piece of ruins, Chunzong found a shuttle formation artifact that could release the power of thunder and lightning. He did not gain anything else. Fifth, sixth, seventh. Chunzong crossed another piece of ruins. During this period, Chunzong naturally did not gain nothing. It was just that his gains were limited. By the time he reached the ninth piece of ruins, Chunzong had gained a little more. He held a mirror in his hand that was half the size of a palm. It was bronze in color and looked simple and unadorned. The front of the mirror was smooth, but it was covered with cracks as if it had been struck with great force. The back of the mirror was covered with unique patterns. The patterns were very complicated and dense, and they gave off a very mysterious aura. There was no doubt that this was another formation artifact. Chunzong also poured in Taichu Sword Origin. This time, the Taichu Sword Origin that he poured in was actually half of his own. A white ray of light blasted out of the mirror. It was as thick as a bowl, but it was extremely terrifying. It seemed like it could shatter everything. The destruction caused shocked Chunzong. 6-star. This power was at the level of a 6-star Yuan underworld cultivator, but it consumed half of his Taichu Sword Origin. Chunzong had no choice but to consume elixirs to recover. Chunzong felt that if he continued to pour in more energy, the power might be even stronger. However, Chunzong did not try again. This was because there were even more cracks on the formation artifact. It gave Chunzong a feeling that it would shatter at any moment. Perhaps he was saving his strength for a final attack. Chunzong did not know that this bronze mirror-like formation artifact was a replica of one of the 3 Great Void Divine Artifacts. Of course, there were many replicas of the 3 Great Void Divine Artifacts. This bronze mirror-like formation artifact's full power attack should be extraordinary. It might even surpass his full power attack. As a means of attack, it was not bad. It could be considered the biggest gain from entering the Great Void Divine Ruins so far. There were all sorts of ways to increase one's combat strength. Some directly increased one's own cultivation, while others were external forces, such as this formation artifact. In some cases, external forces would be limited. However, this was usually competition. When it came to life and death, all means would be used to kill the opponent and protect oneself. In a situation where there were no restrictions, it would be foolish not to use any means that one had. After passing the 9th piece of ruins, Chunzong flew past the pitch-black area and entered the 10th piece of ruins. Within the Great Void Divine Ruins, there were tens of thousands of pieces of ruins. The 10th piece could only be described as insignificant. It was still a long way from the center. However, Chunzong met a second person. This person was wearing purple armor with black edges. He was tall like an iron tower. The aura he exuded was very shocking. It was filled with a terrifying pressure that repelled the surrounding aura. This person also saw Chunzong. A smile appeared on his rough face. "Hello, you must be a direct disciple of the Heavenly Palace. I am a direct disciple of the Purple Extreme Hall of Jiyuan. My name is Wang Tianding." This very strong young man immediately greeted Chunzong. "Hello." Chunzong nodded and smiled in response. "Did you find anything?" Wang Tianding asked with a smile as he walked over leisurely, shaking his shoulders. Then, he said to himself, "My luck is very bad. Since entering this place, I have only found a few broken array tools. Moreover, their power is very ordinary. I collect them more than I use them. However, I found a good array tool just now." This person's body was as strong as an iron tower, but his words were very eloquent, as if he was very familiar with others. Gradually, he walked in front of Chunzong and stretched out his bear-like arm. "Look, this is the array tool I just found." In an instant, something strange happened. Wang Tianding's outstretched arm swelled in an instant. It was as if every muscle on his arm had swelled up. The sound that burst out was very shocking. It was as if a top bowstring had suddenly bounced. It was very shocking. Then, the strong arm also straightened in an instant. An extremely terrifying aura and power exploded, as if it was going to shatter the void. It directly attacked Chunzong's shoulder. Suddenly, very suddenly, just a moment ago, he was smiling and greeting in a very friendly manner. In the next moment, he suddenly attacked. Even when he attacked, he still had a smile on his face. There was no sign that he was going to attack. It was as if he did not hold back. If this punch landed, Chunzong's shoulder would probably be severely injured. This was because Chunzong could acutely sense that his opponent's combat power was very strong. He was an expert in the phenomenal divine body realm. Chapter 2239. Boom! It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Chunzong didn't show any surprise or shock. On the contrary, he already knew about it. Yes, his opponent's every move was hard to guard against. It came without warning, but Chunzong's perception was extremely sharp. He had already caught it. Sword Radiance burst out. The Sword Radiance burst out with unparalleled power. It fiercely split mountains and shattered the earth. It directly collided with the opponent's fist. His opponent attacked without warning, but Chunzong's sword was like a stroke of genius. It was extremely accurate. The collision of the fist and the sword caused a slight tremor. In an instant, an extremely terrible power burst out. A destructive storm raged in all directions, shattering everything around into powder. Wang Tianding's expression changed. Not only was his punch blocked, but the strength of his opponent's sword was also very shocking. It was extremely sharp, causing his fist to feel a sharp pain as if it was being torn apart. Another fist suddenly blasted out, followed by a bombardment of his legs. Every attack carried a terrible power that could destroy mountains. Sword Formula of Heart Refining. Sword 4. With a swing of the sword, Sword Radiance burst out like a violent waterfall. It directly blocked all of the opponent's attacks and repelled him. Good skill. Wang Tianding laughed loudly. He suddenly stomped on the ground and burst out with power. He quickly retreated, making an astonishing sound like a mountain moving horizontally. Knowing that his opponent's combat strength was not inferior to his, Wang Tianding didn't plan to fight to the death. He was very straightforward. If he could win, he would fight. If he couldn't, he would retreat. There was no such thing as face. It was very practical. Of course, this was also because he didn't see any treasures that tempted him. If he did, it would be a different story. Wang Tianding was very fast and decisive. Chunzong didn't chase after him. Instead, he raised his sword to his eyebrows and swung it. In an instant, the sword Radiance pierced through the sky like a meteor. Although it was launched later, it reached Wang Tianding first. Wang Tianding's expression changed slightly. He suddenly turned around and punched violently. The fist force was like a dragon, making a shocking roar. It was powerful and overbearing. The sword radiance and the fist force collided and both collapsed. Borrowing the force, Wang Tianding moved even faster. Boom! His entire body shot far away like a shooting star. Not bad. Qinzong watched as Wang Tianding left. He had no intention of pursuing him. At the end of the day, it was also because he lacked motivation. Moreover, Wang Tianding's combat power was not weak. He was at least at the 5-star level of the phenomenal success divine body realm. In this place, if it wasn't necessary, it would be best not to consume energy. At present, there was only one way to replenish energy, and that was to consume pills. The simple exchange with Wang Tianding made Chun Zongxing realize how dangerous this place was. There was no warning at all. Wang Tianding had greeted Chun Zongxing with familiarity and then attacked him mercilessly in the next breath with a smile on his face. This person was dangerous. It was a good thing that his perception was astonishing. If it had been someone else with ordinary perception, they probably would have fallen for it. Collecting his thoughts, Chun Zong looked straight ahead. His figure flashed, and he turned into a sword light and flew away at an extremely fast speed. Deep in, deeper and deeper. 23rd piece. Chun Zong passed through the pitch-black area and landed on a new piece of ruins. At a glance, a relatively complete palace appeared in front of him. It was a little hazy. Chun Zong's eyes lit up slightly. In the ruins in front of him, he didn't see such a complete palace. It was all collapsed walls and ruins. A complete palace could mean treasures and opportunities. In a flash, Chun Zong increased his speed. In a short while, he arrived in front of the palace. A mysterious aura shrouded the palace, and it seemed to be scorching hot. The door of the palace was half open and half closed. It seemed that someone had entered, but judging from the traces, no one had. Chun Zong didn't rush into the palace. He looked up and saw the plaque of the palace. He could also make out 3 ancient words: Refined Void Palace. Refined Void Palace. After reciting it silently, Chun Zong stepped into the half-open door of the palace. He immediately felt that the aura inside was different from the outside world. It wasn't as chaotic, and it wasn't as heterogeneous. There was a kind of purity that was similar to the void outside the Great Void ruins. Of course, there was still some difference. If that's the case, perhaps the power of the treasures inside is more complete. Chun Zong muttered to himself. At least according to his current experience, that was the case. Chun Zong entered the first palace of the Refined Void Palace. It was also the palace at the front. In this palace, there was nothing around except for a furnace that was taller than a person standing in the center. It seemed to be the center of this palace. Chun Zong's sharp senses allowed him to feel that there was still a trace of scorching aura permeating from within the furnace. When he opened the lid of the furnace, the scorching aura became even more intense. Chun Zong looked inside and saw a weak flame burning. It was green, like the flame of a candle in the wind. It could be extinguished at any time, but it was tenacious and stubbornly held on. It emitted a trace of heat. Using his primordial spirit, Chun Zong determined that this was a divine fire. It was a core that was constantly depleting its power. That's right, this green flame was the core of the divine fire. Chun Zong tried to transfer a trace of the purple world star dragon flame's fire aura. It was immediately absorbed by the flame. It seemed to burn more vigorously, but it was difficult to detect. I wonder if refining it will improve the purple world star dragon flame? Chun Zong thought to himself. The purple world star dragon flame was at the peak of the low-level divine fire level. It was not easy to break through to the mid-level divine fire level. It could either cultivate slowly and accumulate bit by bit until it finally broke through. The other way was to devour other divine fires to nourish itself and break through its own limits. The purple world star dragon flame condensed and turned into a purple-red fire dragon. Dots of black light were distributed like dragon scales. It was magnificent. The fire dragon opened its mouth and inhaled. The green flame seemed to have no power to resist and was directly sucked into the purple world star dragon flame's mouth. A wisp of green light flashed across the purple world star dragon flame and then returned to silence. The purple world star dragon flame was refined by Chunzong using the blazing dragon breath refining technique. The purple world star black star dragon flame had absorbed the essence of 10,000 flames and fire aura from the myriad tribulation godflame mountain, as well as the aura of the myriad tribulation godflame furnace. It was very powerful. More importantly, it was completely under Chunzong's control. It was one with Chunzong. Therefore, Chunzong could clearly feel that the wisp of green flame was being refined bit by bit after entering the purple world star dragon flame. It was increasing the accumulation of the purple world star dragon flame. However, Chunzong was not confident that it could break through to the mid-level divine fire level. With a wave of his hand, the cauldron was also collected by Chunzong. The cauldron itself was also a treasure. It was an array artifact that had been preserved relatively well. Even if he could not use it, he could sell it and exchange it for void coins. Pushing open the door of the small hall, Chunzong stepped into the second small hall. It was empty. In the third palace, there was another furnace cauldron. Just like before, there was a flame, but instead of being green, it was red. After being absorbed by the violet universe star dragon flame, Chunzong took the furnace cauldron. He continued on until he reached the ninth small hall. In the ninth small hall, a figure was sitting. It was shrouded in darkness and could not be seen clearly. However, Chunzong could still feel that the aura inside was filled with death. There was no sign of life. It was not a living person. As if it had sensed Chunzong's entry and the aura of a living person, the figure shrouded in darkness suddenly trembled and let out a low roar. It was like the roar of a wild beast in the middle of the night. It was frightening. Chunzong's heart trembled. The moment he reacted, a black shadow flashed in front of him. A terrifying black light bombarded him. Extreme lightning. With the help of the Heart Palace, Chunzong's heavenly god armor movement technique, extreme lightning, which had already reached the great mastery realm, was instinctively unleashed by him. His entire body seemed to transform into a bolt of lightning as he dodged in an instant. At the same time, sword light suddenly shone. Sword 4. The dazzling sword light blended into the 5,000-meter sword principal domain and erupted with unparalleled power. It pierced through everything and accurately hit the black light. Although he could not see it, Chunzong was sure that his sword had hit the figure and pierced through it. Strangely, from the corner of his eye, Chunzong saw that the figure was still sitting in the darkness. It seemed that it had never moved. Danger struck again. Sword principal domain suppression. Primordial spirit perception. Chunzong realized that the figure was a black shadow. It was like a ghost. It was extremely fast and silent. No wonder it did not seem to have suffered any obvious injuries after being hit by Sword 4. Great World Sword Technique. Boundless Earth. The vast land unfurled like a painting when the sword was unleashed. It extended outwards and directly covered the black figure. The powerful suppressive force immediately caused the black figure to pause for a moment. Sword 4. As soon as the sword struck, it directly pierced through. Endless sword chi raged in the black shadow. Demon Sealing Spell. Chunzong pinched a spell seal with his left hand and cast the spell. The black shadow was obviously in the form of a ghost or an inner demon. It did not have a physical body. Maybe the demon sealing spell could work. Under the demon sealing spell, the black shadow erupted with amazing power and broke the spell. My young friend, please stop. The black shadow that broke the spell did not attack Chunzong. Instead, it spoke. Its voice sounded a little weak. Chunzong's sword that was about to strike suddenly paused. However, the power condensed on it did not dissipate. It was filled with amazing sharpness. His left hand was also pinching the demon sealing spell seal, ready to explode at any time. Who are you? Chunzong asked calmly. I am the Gu Su Holy Man, the deputy hall master of the refined void hall of the Great Void sect. My young friend, you must be a disciple of the heavenly intention palace. The Black Shadow's voice was still weak, but its words were much more coherent. Shenzong's heart skipped a beat. A Tao master of the Great Void sect. It has been many years since the Great Void sect was destroyed. My young friend, you are the first one to come. The Black Shadow sighed softly. There was an indescribable sadness in its voice. I'm also glad that my young friend came and temporarily suppressed this demonic soul. Only then did my consciousness awaken. However, my consciousness cannot be maintained for long. When the time comes, I will perish together with this demonic soul. I will not allow it to do any evil. Before that, can my young friend tell me about the current state of the void? Shenzong pondered for a moment and briefly described the current state of the void. It was not very detailed, but it was enough for one to understand. Chapter 2240. The palace was dim and dark. Shenzong's sword hung low, facing him. In that battle, all my array items were destroyed. I guess the 3 godly treasures were damaged as well. Lord Gu Su sighed. He already knew Shenzong's main purpose for coming here was the 3 godly treasures. However, the 3 godly treasures are the supreme array items of the Great Void Holy Sect. They were the culmination of the essence of the sect's array skills. They were peerless then, and even now, no one could surpass them. Lord Gusu's voice was full of pride, even though he was only left with a remnant of his soul. It was a kind of pride that came from deep within his bones and soul. It was an unshakable belief. The Great Void Holy Sect was unparalleled in array skills and weapon forging. If the Great Void Holy Gate had not been destroyed, the current level of array formation and weapon forging in the Void would have been even higher. Even though there were people who had obtained some inheritance of array formation and weapon forging in the Great Void Holy Ruins, it was still difficult for them to reproduce their former glory. As long as the 3 godly treasures are not damaged, they will recover automatically even if they are damaged. However, with your current strength, even if you encounter the 3 godly treasures, you will not be able to take them. Senior, please tell me what you want. If I can do it, I will do my best, Shenzong said seriously. I'm only left with a remnant of my soul. The Great Void Holy Sect has been destroyed for countless years. What can I ask for? Lord Gu Su said self-deprecatingly. Don't worry, I don't have any requests. I only hope that the human race will become stronger. You are a true disciple of the Heavenly Palace of Will, and you have met me. It is fate. Before my remnant soul dies, I hope that some of the Great Void Holy Sect's legacies will not be lost. I'm only left with a remnant of my soul. I do not have enough power to imprint with my soul. I can only speak verbally. Listen carefully and remember, with the power of my remnant soul, I can only speak in detail once. How much you can remember depends on your ability. With that, Lord Gu Su began to recite. His voice suddenly became very mysterious, as if it contained some kind of secret of the great Tao in the void. It seemed to come from the void and floated into Shenzong's ears. Every word carried an indescribable mystery, which left a deep impression on Shenzong as soon as he heard it, as if it was going to be branded into his divine soul. Shenzong had memorized every single word that Venerable Gu Su had said with his superb memory and comprehension, as well as Venerable Gu Su's self-sacrifice. He had memorized every single word that Venerable Gu Su had said. When the last word was spoken, a ball of light shot out from the Black Shadow. It was a dark light, but it seemed to be directed towards the light. Accompanied by a shrill roar filled with unwillingness, the Black Shadow started burning. It was the remnant soul of Honorable Gu Su that had perished together with the demonic soul. Shenzong had learned a lot from the conversation just now. For example, the demonic soul was formed from the souls of powerful cultivators who had died in the Great Void Divine Ruins. Their souls had been corroded by the baleful aura and other negative auras for many years, and they were unwilling to give up. The stronger the unwillingness and resentment, the stronger the devil soul. Venerable Gu Su had a good mentality, so his devil soul was not very strong. Otherwise, Chenzong would not have been his opponent. The devil soul had the ability to invade one's soul, take over one's body, and turn into a demon. However, its nature was different. In addition, Chenzong also learned the names of some treasures, but unfortunately, he didn't know where those treasures were. The only good thing was that some clues might make it easier for him to find and discover them. It was better than nothing. The biggest gain was probably the inheritance that Venerable Gu Su had imparted, the Void Refinement Seal. It was also known as the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm. This was not an offensive or defensive divine ability, nor was it a cultivation formula. However, it was one of the most important and fundamental core divine abilities of the Great Void Divine Sect. The function of the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm was to refine the Great Void Divine Sect's formation equipment. According to Honorable Gu Su, the more powerful the Great Void Divine Sect's formation item was, the harder it was to collect it. One had to either have the corresponding Dharma incantation or use an extremely powerful force to suppress and collect it by force. Besides, there was a third method, which was the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm. In short, the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm was a commonly used auxiliary divine ability to refine Great Void divine artifacts. It could replace some of the unique divine incantations of the Great Void divine artifacts. Once cultivated to the extreme, it was possible to refine or even refine the 3 divine artifacts of the Great Void. Venerable Gu Su had imparted this technique to Chenzong because of fate, but also because he did not want it to end. Although he was not the only Dao Master in the Great Void Divine Sect who had mastered the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm, no one could be sure that the other Dao Masters would be able to pass it down. Other than the 36th tier of the Void Refinement Realm, there were other auxiliary divine abilities. However, due to the exhaustion of the Remnant Soul and the Devil's Soul, it could not be passed down. This was Venerable Gu Su's last regret. Chenzong was naturally very attentive when it came to the collection of the 3 divine artifacts of the Great Void. Enlightenment. As one of the top auxiliary divine abilities of the Great Void Divine Sect, the Void Refinement Seal was naturally mysterious and profound. Even though Chenzong had a high level of comprehension and was far superior to others, he still felt that it was very difficult. Other than its mystery, Chenzong did not have enough understanding of array artifacts. After all, the Void Refinement Seal was mainly used to target array artifacts, and the foundation of array artifacts was array Dao. As for array Dao, Chenzong could only say that he had scratched the surface. He could not even be considered a beginner. He was only slightly better than those cultivators who had never come into contact with array Dao. With a weak foundation and a high level of comprehension, Chenzong did not leave the Void Refinement Hall. Instead, he continued to cultivate the Void Refinement Seal. Over and over again, the so-called Void Refinement Seal naturally condensed into a mysterious seal. At the first level, the seal was relatively illusory. It felt like a candle in the wind, as if it would be extinguished at any time. However, when Chenzong cultivated to the second level, he realized that the Void Refinement Seal had become much more solid. Cultivation, continuous cultivation. For a moment, Chenzong forgot about everything else. He formed a seal with both hands. In an instant, streaks of illusory flowing light were drawn in the void like a brush. They shuttled back and forth like butterflies. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into a mysterious seal. Void Refinement Seal. The third level is the limit of what I can comprehend right now. Although I can still continue to improve, the amount of time I need to spend is at least 10 times or even tens of times more. Chenzong thought to himself, spending so much time just to reach the 4th level was too much. After all, the opening time of the Great Void Ruins was limited. For the first 3 levels, Chenzong used the full power of the 10 intents of mind to deduce them. He was able to comprehend and cultivate them in a short period of time. As for the 4th level, it was even more difficult. Even if he had the power of the 10 intents of mind, he could not achieve it in a short period of time. However, Chunzong could use the too intense of mind to comprehend the fourth level as he hurried along. It was less efficient and took longer, but it would not hinder his movements. The urgent thing now was to recover the mental strength that he had consumed. Void Refinement Hall. A figure descended and appeared in front of the hall. When he looked up, he was delighted. Then, his expression changed. Someone entered before me. In a flash, the black-robed figure immediately entered the Void Refinement Hall. It was empty, but there were still traces of the cauldron being taken away. It was still very fresh. Enter, enter, enter. The figure continued to enter until he saw two figures in the last hall of the Void Refinement Hall. One of them was Chunzong, who was sitting cross-legged to recover his mental strength. The other was the body of Venerable Gu Su. The newcomer's gaze swept across the hall and landed on Chunzong. His mind spun rapidly, and he made a decision in an instant. Attack! The treasures in the Void Refinement Hall must have been taken by this person. Since he was the first to arrive, he would be able to obtain the treasures as well as the treasures on his body, as long as he killed this person. Of course, he also dared to attack because he sensed that this person's cultivation was only at the initial level of the Yuan Underworld stage, while he was at the middle level of the Yuan Underworld stage. The Yuan Underworld stage wasn't like the Tao controlling stage, where there were many divisions between the first and the ninth revolution. The difference between the initial level and the middle level was greater than the difference between the first and the third revolution of the Tao controlling stage. Even if the other party was a genius, the disparity in cultivation would make the other party no match for him. Chunzong had sensed this person the moment he arrived. He had also sensed the other party's cultivation. The reason he hadn't reacted was because his mental strength hadn't fully recovered. However, when the other party attacked, Chunzong opened his eyes, and a sharp light shot out like a sword. It seemed to be able to penetrate everything, causing the other party's heart to tremble and palpitations to erupt for no reason. There was no posture, but a sword light suddenly flashed in front of him. It was incomparably sharp and directly tore through the black light, as if it was tearing the black sky apart. It was too fast and extremely sharp. The figure was so shocked that he couldn't dodge it at all. Kill! The sword slashed through the air. It should be known that although Chunzong's cultivation was only at the initial level of the Yuan Underworld stage, his combat strength could reach the 5-star level, which was very shocking. Although this person's cultivation was at the intermediate level of the Yuan Underworld stage, his combat strength was actually only at the peak of the 3-star level. The difference between a 3-star level and a 5-star level was simply overwhelming. The sword light was withdrawn and returned to the scabbard. Chunzong didn't get up. He continued to recover his mental energy. Only when his mental energy was fully recovered did he stand up. With a flash, he appeared beside the severed body. Even the person's soul hadn't escaped. It had been directly shattered by Chunzong's sword. Otherwise, if a Yuan Underworld stage powerhouse's soul had escaped after their body was destroyed, they could still survive for a period of time and take over the body of someone who hadn't condensed a soul yet. The other party's storage ring was also taken by Chunzong. He checked it and found that it was relatively ordinary. There wasn't anything that could make Chunzong's eyes light up. However, it was better than nothing. He treated it as a way to enrich his accumulation and wealth. His wealth had been accumulated little by little like this. As for the other party's identity, Chunzong didn't pay too much attention to it. Regardless of the other party's identity, since the other party had made a move on him and tried to kill him, he wouldn't show any mercy. Of course, if the other party had the ability to escape from his sword, he wouldn't deliberately chase after them. It could only be said that this person was very unlucky. He had underestimated the difference in strength and was courting death. Chapter 2241. The Void Refinement Seal was profound and vast. As Chunzong hurried along, he tried to comprehend it using his two minds at the same time. The efficiency was very low, and he did not know how long it would take for him to comprehend the fourth level. This was also because Chun Zong's foundation in formations was weak. After all, the Void Refinement Seal contained a large amount of the essence of formations and a small amount of the essence of craftsmanship. Within the Great Void Ruins, there were tens of thousands of wastelands. There were also many people who entered. There were at least tens of thousands of people in the Dao Manipulation Realm, Yuan Ming Realm, and Divinity Realm. They entered from all directions. In the beginning, they entered from the outermost area and gained nothing. But as they went deeper, they gradually gained more and more. However, they would also encounter each other, and the competition would become intense, resulting in deaths and injuries. Chun Zong crossed one wasteland after another and went deeper. Although he did not know where the 3 Great Void Divine weapons were, he thought that the deeper he went, the higher the chances of finding them. Unknowingly, time passed. Chun Zong had already crossed hundreds of wastelands and truly entered the depths of the Great Void Ruins. The deeper he went, the higher the chances of finding an opportunity. Chun Zong had obtained a lot of formation weapons. Of course, there were not many that could help him. A wave of mysterious fluctuation seemed to have attracted strands of invisible energy to gather around his body. It seemed to be condensing into an extremely mysterious mark. Chun Zong revealed a smile. He had finally comprehended and mastered the 4th level of the Void Refinement Seal. There were 36 levels of the Void Refinement Seal. Basically, the first 3 levels were a threshold. When he reached the 4th level, it was obviously more mysterious than the first 3 levels. As long as he mastered the 4th level, the next 5 and 6 levels would not be too difficult. The real difficulty was the 7th level. However, the 7th level was still far away from him. At least for the 5th and 6th level, Chun Zong felt that because of his weak foundation in formations and craftsmanship, it was very difficult to comprehend. He estimated that he would need to spend 100 times more time and effort than the 4th level. Currently, the 2 hearts of one mind would no longer consume too much of his mental strength. After all, the recovery speed of his mental strength was extremely fast under various conditions, and it was enough to keep up with the consumption of the 2 hearts of one mind. Slowly comprehending, it was better than nothing. As long as his foundation in formations and refining was supplemented, he would be able to comprehend the 5th level in a short period of time. As long as he comprehended the 5th level, he would be able to master it easily with his absolute control over his strength. The pitch-black area was vast, and the Great Void Divine Ruins was actually a miniature version of the Void. For example, the pieces of ruins were like galaxies or star regions, and the dark areas between them were like belts of nothingness. If one were to look down from the highest point of the sky, the entire Great Void Immortal Ruins could be divided into irregular rings from the periphery to the center. Chun Zong stepped into a new wasteland. This wasteland was huge. Other than Chun Zong, there were also many people who stepped into it. However, they all maintained a certain distance from each other and were very cautious. Those who could cultivate to the Ascension Realm were no fools. After all, fools were already dead and the grass on their graves would have already withered over and over again. Furthermore, entering the Great Void Divine Ruins was a competition. Apart from oneself, even fellow disciples of the same sect would become targets of competition. As such, traveling alone was not a bad choice. Not long after, dozens of people stepped into the wasteland. Basically, they were all at the Yuan Ming realm. It was difficult for Dao Manipulation Realm cultivators to arrive. Even if they did, they would lack the strength to compete. In the center of the wasteland was a huge tower. It was completely black and covered with dark golden patterns. These were formation path patterns, and they looked extremely mysterious. It was a formation path pagoda. The formation path pagoda stood majestically on the wasteland like a mountain, as if it was suppressing the wasteland. Formation path pagoda. Chun Zong's eyes lit up slightly. The ancient Void Holy Man had said that there were many types of formation path pagoda in the Great Void Divine Sect. They were divided into 5 levels, from low level to mid level, high level to top level, and then to supra level. The formation path contained in the low-level formation path pagoda was the foundation of formation path. In other words, it was not at the level of void formation path. For example, the various formations that Chunzong had encountered in the Lingwu Holy World were the foundation of formation path. As for the mid-level formation path pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level formation path. As for the high-level formation path pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level formation path. As for the top-level formation path pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level formation path. As for the super-level formation path pagoda, it contained the mysteries of star-level formation path, also known as void-level formation path. There was only one super-level formation path pagoda in the Great Void Divine Sect. There were as many as 10 top-level formation path pagoda. There were hundreds of high-level formation path pagoda. There were thousands of mid-level formation path pagoda. There were tens of thousands of low-level formation path pagoda. Of course, that was when the Great Void Divine Sect was still around. In the Great Battle back then, the Great Void Divine Sect was almost destroyed. Naturally, the formation path pagoda was also severely damaged. This was especially so for the super-level formation path pagoda. During the battle between the sovereigns, it eventually collapsed. It had to be said that it was a regret that could not be made up for. The top-level formation path pagoda was also severely damaged. There was not much left. Most of the remaining ones were probably the low-level formation path pagoda. However, according to the Gusu Holy Man's guess, there were only a few hundred of them left. The one in front of him was the low-level formation path pagoda. In every formation path pagoda, one could receive the inheritance of formation path. Of course, there was a limit to the number of times one could receive the inheritance. According to the Gusu Holy Man, every low-level formation path pagoda could only receive the inheritance 10 times. After it was used up, it had to be replenished. When the Great Void Divine Sect was still around, it could be replenished. However, now that the inheritance was gone, there was no way to replenish it. According to the information that had been passed down, it could be determined that this formation path pagoda was a low-level formation path pagoda that contained the fundamental mysteries of formation path. However, was the inheritance of formation path still there? No matter what, since they had encountered it, it was fate. Of course, they had to give it a try. However, there were dozens of people. Only one person could receive the inheritance at a time. In other words, only those who reached the top of the formation path pagoda had the right to receive the inheritance. If there was only one inheritance, then only one person could receive it. As he thought about it, Chunzong's figure shot towards the formation path pagoda like a sword radiance. Ripples spread out like water. In an instant, Chunzong's figure disappeared into the pagoda. The other Yuan underworld cultivators did the same. The staircase that led to the next level was at the end. Basically, as the Great Void Ruins opened many times, those who entered and exited would slowly organize the information and combine it with some information from the Great Void Divine Sect to make deductions. Therefore, these Yuan underworld cultivators knew that this was a low-level formation path pagoda. They also knew that if they wanted to receive the inheritance, they had to reach the top. Charge! Dozens of people burst out at full speed and rushed towards the staircase. That was the only way to the next level. Get lost! The staircase was deliberately made very narrow so that only one person could pass through. Naturally, there was a need to fight. Someone immediately attacked the cultivators beside him without hesitation. You're the one who needs to get lost. There was a loud roar. Of course, no one started a fierce battle. Once a battle started, unless everyone was involved, it would only give others a chance to step onto the staircase. An extremely tyrannical light, carrying a vigorous and overbearing power, blasted towards Chunzong. Its power was so shocking that it made him feel pressured. Chunzong's eyes flashed as he unsheathed his sword. Sword light was vast and mighty as it slashed out. Extreme lightning. In the next moment, Chunzong took a step forward like a bolt of lightning. He was so fast that he surpassed everyone else. Stop him! The expressions of the others changed. If Chunzong reached the staircase first, he would be in the lead. Perhaps they would still have a chance to take back this temporary lead, but it would undoubtedly increase the difficulty. In an instant, dozens of powerful attacks blasted towards Chunzong without mercy. They would not hesitate to kill him on the spot. This was the time to fight. They couldn't care less about anything else. Great Void Escape Technique. Without hesitation, Chunzong executed the Great Void Escape Technique, which had reached perfection and avoided dozens of attacks. He appeared on the staircase. There was a limit to the staircase, so he could only climb it. However, before he climbed the staircase, Chunzong still had to repay his debt. 11th level Blazing Core Flame. The power of the Taichu Sword Origin Body erupted. Great World Sword Art, Boundless Earth. With a swing of his sword, the 5,000-meter-long sword Dao domain transformed into a vast expanse of land that swept out and enveloped the dozens of Yuan underlings. The terrifying power suppressed them like the suppression of a land. The profoundness of the Great World Sword Art was astonishing. The Boundless Earth suppressed the dozens of Yuan underworld cultivators, but every Yuan underworld cultivator suffered the same suppressive power. For a moment, the dozens of Yuan underworld cultivators were unable to move. After sheathing his sword, Chunzong turned around and stepped onto the staircase, climbing rapidly. In an instant, Chunzong rushed to the second floor. Some people also broke free from the suppression of the Boundless Earth and immediately rushed towards the staircase. There was still hope for them. However, Chunzong was a step too slow. Unless they were much faster than him, it would be almost impossible for them to overtake him. Chunzong used the Great Void Escape Technique and shook off his opponents. He once again stepped onto the staircase and rushed to an even higher floor. The low-level Array Formation Pagoda only had 3 floors. Stepping onto the 3rd floor was the last floor. In the center of the 3rd floor of the low-level Array Formation Pagoda was a circular platform that looked like an altar. Chunzong landed on it directly. This was the foundation stone of the Array Formation inheritance. A buzzing sound was suddenly heard, and the surrounding lights seemed to be lit up. They flickered and shuttled back and forth continuously. Chunzong couldn't help but smile. This meant that the low-level Array Formation Pagoda could also accept the basic inheritance of the Array Formation path. This was exactly what he lacked. If this had been a mid-level or higher Array Formation Pagoda, Chunzong wouldn't have been able to understand it even if he had accepted the inheritance. After all, he lacked the foundation. As the Array Formation revolved, Chunzong immediately saw countless mysteries evolve before his eyes. Through a mysterious method, they were injected into his consciousness, as if they were about to form an imprint. Chapter 2242. The mysteries of the foundation of the Tao of Array constantly poured into Chunzong's mind like a flood that was about to burst. After all, although the foundation of the Tao of Array was called the foundation and seemed very simple, it wasn't simple at all. It was broad and profound, mysterious and boundless. Even with Chunzong's strong spirit, he felt that it was bloated and full. 3 intents at once. It consumed more energy than 2 intents at once, but it could maintain a certain recovery speed and not exhaust the power of the mind. After all, Chunzong did not forget that there were other cultivators. Who knew if they would be unwillingly waiting for him to come out before attacking him? If that was the case, once the power of the mind was exhausted, it would be very disadvantageous for him. Under the 3 intents at once, coupled with his strong comprehension, one of them was used to sort out the fundamental mysteries of formation Tao that were pouring into his spirit, while the other 2 intents were used to comprehend. Combined with the superficial knowledge of formation Tao that Chunzong had mastered in the past, he quickly got started, comprehended, and improved at an astonishing speed. The existence of the Formation Tao Pagoda was naturally to pass on the secrets of Formation Tao to the disciples of the Great Void Sect. Naturally, it would not purposely destroy a person's spirit. Therefore, even if it was a barbaric infusion, It would adjust itself according to the individual's condition. When there were signs of being unable to bear it, it would slow down. When the upper limit was reached, it would intensify. Chunzong's endurance was undoubtedly amazing, so the speed of the infusion was even more terrifying. As it poured in crazily, Chunzong continued to comprehend. If the Great Void Sect was still around, this speed would definitely shock the entire sect. It took a few days for Chunzong to finish receiving the fundamental inheritance of Formation Dao. The surrounding light gradually dimmed and disappeared. At the same time, Chunzong opened his eyes. There seemed to be strands of light shuttling back and forth in his eyes, drawing the outline of a formation. While receiving the inheritance, Chunzong was also sorting out and comprehending at the same time. With his strong comprehension and high realm, he comprehended many mysteries. For a moment, Chunzong was confident that he could comprehend the 5th level of the Refining Void Seal in a short time. The Refining Void Seal was closely related to the mysteries of Formation Dao. Although it was also related to the mysteries of weapon forging, it was not that significant. With enough knowledge of Formation Dao, the effect was much better than having sufficient knowledge of weapon forging. Of course, if he could obtain the knowledge of weapon forging, it would be even better. Stepping out of the cornerstone of Formation Dao inheritance, Chunzong walked down the stairs. There was a person waiting on the 2nd level of the low-level Array Formation Pagoda. It seemed like he had gone through an intense battle and was the final victor. Upon seeing Chunzong, that person's eyes flashed with a bright light, as though a raging fire was burning within him. However, he didn't act. After all, the inheritance wasn't a physical object. Even if he defeated his opponent, he wouldn't be able to take it away. Since this was the case, why waste time? Chunzong did not make a move either. He went down to the 1st floor and walked out of the Formation Dao Pagoda. Then, he heard a roar of anger and anger. This was because there was only one last Formation Dao inheritance left. After Chunzong accepted it, there would be no replenishment from the Great Void Sect. Chunzong could not help but feel lucky that he was one step faster. Next, I will need the basic inheritance of the Weapon Refining Path and the Intermediate Star Rank Array Path inheritance, Chunzong thought to himself. Only by combining them would he be able to cultivate the Void Refining Seal to a higher level. The Refining Void Seal was one of the highest inheritances of the Great Void Sect. It was the essence of the Great Void Sect. The Refining Void Seal was divided into 36 levels and 12 realms. 3 levels made 1 realm. The 12th realm could only be comprehended and cultivated by mastering the Supreme Formation Dao inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Dao inheritance. From the 9th to the 11th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Dao inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Dao inheritance as support. From the 6th to the 8th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Dao inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Dao inheritance as support. From the 3rd to the 5th realm, one needed the Supreme Formation Dao inheritance and the Supreme Weapon Dao inheritance as support. From the 1st to the 3rd realm, one needed the Basic Formation Dao inheritance and the Basic Weapon Dao inheritance. Chunzong had learned Weapon Dao before. Although it was not profound and he did not deliberately study it, it was not impossible to say that it was a Basic Weapon Dao inheritance. Every realm was divided into 3 levels. In other words, after he thoroughly studied and comprehended the basic inheritance of the Array Dao, he could comprehend and cultivate the Void Refining Seal to the 9th level. As for the 10th level, it required a mid-grade star rank Array Dao inheritance and a low-grade equipment Dao inheritance. These were all opportunities. Chunzong could only try his best to obtain them. Sharpening a knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Chunzong advanced while comprehending the basic formation Dao inheritance. Currently, he had comprehended 10% of the formation Dao inheritance. The remaining 90% would take some time. However, the basic formation Dao inheritance corresponded to the level below the Ascension realm. For Chunzong, who was at the Origin Underworld realm and had a higher level of comprehension than the Origin Underworld realm, it did not count at all. Chunzong estimated that it would not be long before he completely comprehended and mastered the basic formation Tao inheritance. Advance, advance, advance. Although his combat strength did not increase, his horizons were constantly broadening and accumulating. When he arrived at the next ruin, Chunzong saw a huge tree stump. The reason it was called a tree stump was because the tree had been destroyed by a terrifying power. Only the bottom section was left. Even though it was only a section, it was still shockingly huge. It was about 1,000 meters tall, but it was tens of thousands of meters wide. It was hard to imagine how tall the tree would have been if it had been whole. After all, the height of the tree was dozens of times higher than its width. Unfortunately, the battle back then had been too intense. Such a huge tree had also been destroyed, leaving only this 1,000-meter-tall tree stump. However, the tree was not completely destroyed. At the very least, with Chunzong's powerful perception, he could sense that it still contained a bit of life force. However, the life force was not strong enough to completely revive the tree. It could only stay here and allow time to pass. After an unknown number of years, it would truly disappear. The world's sacred tree. Chunzong sighed softly. This tree stump was left behind by the world's sacred tree. The world's sacred tree was a sacred tree that could only be born in some worlds. However, the Great Void Sect was very powerful. They had found a sapling of the world's sacred tree in a world and transplanted it into the Great Void Sect. They had specially constructed a large array to simulate the environment of the world so that the world's sacred tree could grow. The Great Void Sect would also comprehend the mysteries of the formation Tao from the world's sacred tree. Of course, the fruit of the world's sacred tree also contained extraordinary power. It was a cultivation treasure. However, the world's sacred tree was only left with a stump. Its vitality was like a candle in the wind. Even it was slowly dying, let alone blossoming and bearing fruit. It was impossible to even think about it. After all, the array that simulated the world around the world's sacred tree had been destroyed. Chunzong noticed that some cultivators were climbing up the tree stump. They seemed to be comprehending something. Chunzong's figure flashed, and he rushed up the tree stump. This 1,000-meter-tall and 10,000-meter-wide tree stump was rough and uneven. It was filled with potholes. Some of the potholes were dozens of meters deep. Standing there, Chunzong could feel traces of aura fluctuations through physical contact. It was the aura fluctuations of the world's sacred tree. It was very mysterious. After trying, Chunzong realized that the aura he could feel in the potholes was stronger. He chose a pothole to enter and sat down cross-legged. Chunzong began to feel the aura with all his might. Of course, he used the 3 intents of mind. One of his intents was to pay attention to the outside world to prevent being attacked, while the other was to comprehend the mysteries of the aura. The world's sacred tree contained the mysteries of the world. In short, when the world's sacred tree was born in a world, it carried the mysteries of that world. It was almost like the origin of the world. The two were closely related. Of course, the more powerful the world, the more powerful the world's sacred tree would be. However, at the same time, the more powerful the world, the lower the probability of the world's sacred tree being born. The probability of the world's sacred tree being born was already very small. Under even smaller circumstances, there was almost no hope. The black and white world was the original realm, but there was no world's sacred tree in it. Firstly, the black and white world was too strong. It was so strong that it was difficult for it to be born. Secondly, the black and white world was special. The black and white world was divided into two. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the world's sacred tree to be born. Otherwise, given the tyrannical black and white world, once the world's sacred tree was born, how amazing would it be? Under the 3 intents of mind, Chunzong's comprehension efficiency was very high, especially when Chunzong came into contact with the remaining aura of the world's sacred tree. His own great path of the world was also stimulated. A buzzing sound rang out. Soon after, numerous illusory figures spread out from Chunzong's body. Those illusory figures gradually condensed, transforming into a sky above and a land below. The sky was clear and the land was turbid. Within it, vegetation, forests, mountains, rivers, and even birds and beasts gradually appeared. This was Chunzong's great path of the world. Strictly speaking, Chunzong's study and mastery of the great path of the world were not as good as his heart sword principle. After all, Chunzong had initially cultivated the sword and comprehended the sword principle. The great path of the world was only comprehended later. Furthermore, Chunzong had been practicing the sword all this time. His growth in the sword principle would definitely surpass that of the great path of the world. However, comprehending the remaining aura of the world's sacred tree's stump had stimulated his own great path of the world. It was of great help to his comprehension of the great path of the world, just like comprehending the aura of the world origin. The world's sacred tree had been nurtured by the Great Void Divine sect for many years and was constantly growing. It was comparable to the world's sacred tree in the middle world. Even though it was only a remnant now, it was still very amazing. Other cultivators could also comprehend some of its mysteries. Of course, this was useful for Yuan Underworld and Dao Manipulation Realm cultivators, especially those in the Dao Manipulation Realm. The improvement would be more obvious. Yuan Underworld cultivators could also improve, but it was useless at the Divine Ability Realm unless it was a complete world sacred tree. Now, it was only a stump, not even 1,000th of its peak. Even the top Yuan Underworld cultivators would not have much effect, let alone the Divine Ability Realm. Chapter 2243. The sky, the earth, the trees, the grass, the stones, the mountains, the water droplets, the river, the ocean, Chunzong saw a world unfold in front of him. The spring water flowed, the wind and clouds surged, and the sun shone brightly, illuminating the earth and everything. In an instant, dark clouds gathered and spread with the wind, covering the sky and the sun. It was so heavy that it became darker and heavier, as if it would collapse at any time. Rumble. An extremely oppressive sound suddenly exploded. It was the sound of thunder, rolling and vibrating endlessly, resounding throughout the world and shaking the clouds. Amidst the crackling sound, lightning suddenly wreaked havoc in the dark clouds like a dragon in the sea, and bean-sized raindrops fell from the sky. An incomparably huge thunderbolt struck down, directly bombarding a piece of land that was full of vitality, exploding a huge crater. Rainwater poured down, filling the crater and turning it into a pool. The sun rose and the moon set, and the moon rose and set, day after day, month after month, year after year. Gradually, the water level of the pool kept falling until it dried up. A sapling broke out of the ground, absorbing the spiritual power of the earth, the essence of the sun and the moon, and the vitality of the rain and dew, and slowly grew. As time passed, the sapling grew into a small sapling. A figure surrounded by runes descended. His face could not be seen clearly, but one could feel that the runes around him were extremely mysterious. They contained a terrifying power that seemed to have reached the level of a Dao Master. The Dao Master was very happy to see the sapling. The formation pattern spread out and covered it, digging up a large piece of land and taking it away. In the blink of an eye, the sapling was replanted, and a figure surrounded by formation patterns like a star circle, exuding monstrous power, surrounded it. With a wave of his hand, formation patterns scattered, and a large formation gradually took shape. Inside the large formation, it was as if heaven and earth had been opened. The top was clear and the bottom was turbid, and the power of the formation patterns condensed into the alternating sun and moon. The formation patterns condensed into the mighty wind and clouds, and the formation patterns condensed into the boundless earth, which quickly spread out. A world. It was actually evolving a world with the power of the formation. Countless formation patterns continued to condense and fall, and that world became more and more complete until it was completely complete. A figure exuding a terrifying aura stepped down from the sky and planted a sapling in the center of the formation world. In an instant, Chunzong understood that this was the memory of the stump of the world divine tree, which was stimulated by his own great path of the world. This was also an opportunity that belonged to Chunzong, because other cultivators who comprehended the great path of the world did not have such an opportunity, because they did not master the great path of the world. The great path of the world and the world divine tree complemented each other. Chunzong also did not expect that he would receive such an opportunity. The sapling from before should have been the very beginning of this world tree of God. It was born in a world. There were many ways to give birth to a world tree of God in a world, and what he saw was one of them. The Tao Master, who was surrounded by formation patterns, was the Tao Master of the Great Void Holy Sect. When he found the sapling of the world divine tree, he was very happy and took it back to the Great Void Holy Sect. The sovereigns and Tao sovereigns of the Great Void Holy Sect worked together to create a world of array formation. They planted the world tree of the world in it and merged it with the world created by the power of the array formation. Gradually, it grew stronger and stronger. Fully comprehending, the formation world was like a real world, with the sun rising and the moon setting, the cycle of the 4 seasons, the alternation of light and darkness, and the reincarnation of life and death. Chunzong was like a bystander, but also like he was experiencing it himself. He felt as if he had integrated himself into the world divine tree, as if he had become the world divine tree, and was absorbing the essence of heaven and earth, the sun and the moon, step by step, to grow stronger. This was a kind of indescribable joy, a kind of moving feeling in life. It made Chunzong feel incomparably moved, as if he was growing, as if he was constantly improving and breaking through in his cultivation. It was incomparably wonderful, and he was immersed in it, becoming deeper and deeper. Unknowingly, the world divine tree had grown to an astonishing level. Its trunk was tens of thousands of meters long, and it was millions of meters tall. It stood in the formation world and became the center of the formation world. It had vast and mighty power, as if it was endless. However, this power was not lethal. In other words, the power of the world divine tree was the power of life. It was a mysterious power, and it did not have any direct attacking power. Many people from the Great Void Holy Sect would come here to comprehend the mysteries of the world divine tree and to improve their formation skills. Some of the essence leaves of the world divine tree also contained extraordinary power. When the fruits were ripe, they would be plucked and become the cultivation treasures of the Great Void Holy Sect. Unknowingly, disaster struck. Tyrannical foreign tribes charged into the Great Void Holy Sect. These foreign tribes were huge and possessed terrifying power. They were all at the sovereign realm, and there were many at the Tao Lord level. Naturally, the Great Void Holy Sect resisted with all their might. Gradually, cultivators from other sect forces arrived. Destruction. Everything was destroyed. The foundation of the formation world began to be destroyed under the terrifying power. It was unstoppable. When the formation world was broken, the world divine tree was also revealed. It was discovered. The world divine tree was a treasure. However, in this fierce battle, where even the sovereign realm cultivators were involved, the world divine tree was also destroyed. Chunzong could feel waves of intense pain sweeping over him, and he was on the verge of death. In the end, the world divine tree was broken. Its branches were taken away, and some were scattered everywhere. In the end, only a stump was left. Ruins. After a battle that lasted for hundreds of years, everything was turned into ruins. There were countless casualties. Through the memories of the world divine tree, Chunzong saw countless cultivators fall in various places. Gradually, the battle ended, and everything returned to silence. This place changed from the Great Void Holy Sect to the Great Void Holy Ruins. It was isolated from the outside world by the space-time storm. The remaining power of the world divine tree began to decline because it could not be replenished. Although the rate of decline was slow, it was indeed declining. The domain that it could sense was also shrinking along with the decline of its power. Now, the range of the tree stump's perception was only a few pieces of ruins around it. Moreover, it was still declining. At this rate, the power of this stump of the world divine tree would be depleted in a few thousand years. It would be completely silent, and it would be equivalent to death. The growth of the world divine tree was very slow. Chunzong felt that he had experienced an incomparably long period of time. That was because he had merged with the memories of the World Divine Tree. He had followed the experience of the World Divine Tree from its initial emergence as a seedling. Hundreds of thousands of years. Chunzong estimated that it would take at least hundreds of thousands of years for the World Divine Tree to grow from a seedling to a height of 1,000,000 meters. However, that was not the end. The World Divine Tree could continue to grow. It could even reach a height of a few million meters. Unfortunately, in that great battle, the Great Void Holy Sect was destroyed. The World Divine Tree was also destroyed. The fact that it still had some power left proved that the World Divine Tree was tenacious. However, no matter how strong it was, it could not withstand the erosion of time in its broken state. Without the power of the outside world to replenish it, the World Divine Tree would eventually perish in the river of time. If there was power from the outside world to replenish it, even if it was in a broken state, there was hope that it could slowly recover. However, it was a pity that Chunzong could not bring it away. Previously, when his consciousness merged with the memories of the World Divine Tree, it was almost as if they were one. There was an indescribable feeling. He could not bear to see the World Divine Tree die like this, but there was nothing he could do. Junior of the human clan, don't be sad for me. As if he was hallucinating, a weak voice sounded, startling Chunzong. Junior of the human clan, don't be surprised. I am the spirit of the World Divine Tree. A second voice sounded, letting Chunzong know the identity of the other party. The spirit of the World Divine Tree. As a natural World Divine Tree, it was not that simple. It had spirituality, and that spirituality would slowly strengthen until it finally gained consciousness. Unexpectedly, the spirit of the World Divine Tree was still alive. Chunzong thought that it had been destroyed in that great battle. It seemed that it was not destroyed, but fell into a deep sleep because it was too weak. If it were not for Chunzong's great path of the world, the spirit of the World Divine Tree would continue to sleep until it truly perished. But now it had been awakened. Even if it was awakened, it could not change the outcome of its eventual demise. Junior of the human clan, you have the aura of the world. The spirit of the World Divine Tree's weak voice sounded again. You and I are fated. Soon, I will disappear completely. In the end, I can't escape death. Why don't I bestow the last of my power to you? The spirit of the World Divine Tree said. Its weak voice sounded a little more enlightened, like a wise old man who had weathered many hardships. Immediately, a strong force burst out from the World Divine Tree. The dozens of cultivators who were comprehending the mysteries of the tree stump could not resist the force. Under the impact of this force, they were immediately sent flying, almost flying out of the ruins. Rays of light shone, enveloping the whole tree stump. They were about to soar into the sky, but when they reached thousands of meters in the air, they suddenly stopped. Then, from all directions, they converged and fell to the center, like a waterfall falling from heaven. Not everyone on the tree stump was sent flying. There was still one person on the tree stump, and that was Chunzong. Chunzong received preferential treatment. The rays of light fell from the sky, and a force rushed up from below. In an instant, Chunzong was suspended in the air, surrounded by two forces. The force kept pouring into Chunzong's body. The shadow of the great path of the world around Chunzong became more and more condensed and gradually expanded. The last remaining force of the World Divine Tree did not improve Chunzong's cultivation. Instead, it was integrated into Chunzong's body, so that Chunzong's future cultivation would be smoother, whether it was qi refining or body refining. Another benefit was that it could further improve Chunzong's comprehension and mastery of the great path of the world, and he was constantly approaching the Heart Sword Way. Chapter 2244. The blackout didn't come until now. The power kept surging, even though it was only the remaining power of the World Tree, which was less than 1/10,000th of its original power. It was still magnificent and vast. It should be noted that after hundreds of thousands of years of growth, the World Divine Tree was millions of meters tall. The power it contained was so vast that not even a town master could compare with it. Even if it was less than 1/10,000th or even 100,000th, it was still amazing and extremely pure. Such power kept pouring in and being absorbed and refined by Chunzong. The mysteries contained in it were also comprehended by Chunzong. The accumulation of the great path of the world became more and more vigorous. Imperceptibly, Chunzong's mastery and application of the great path of the world improved. When all the power poured into Chunzong's body naturally floated down. Destined descendant of a human clan, I hope my last power will be useful. A weak voice sounded. At last, it became intermittent and finally returned to silence. Chunzong was silent. Then he whispered, "Thank you," although the spiritual deity of the world tree could no longer hear him. A feeling of sadness lingered in Chunzong's heart. It was like strands of silk weaving back and forth, turning into a net of sadness that enveloped his heart. The resonance of the memory, as if the experience of incarnating into the world tree, made Chunzong feel as if he had experienced it himself. Now, the world tree gave him its last remaining power, which was enough to maintain its weak vitality for thousands of years. This gift was very heavy and very moving. The strong and vigorous power kept surging in his body, like waves rising and falling. Chunzong kept running his cultivation method and urging the power of the world divine body to refine this power. At the same time, he was comprehending the great path of the world under the dual mind realm. Damn it, it's him. It's him who got the remaining power of the world tree. The cultivators who had been sent flying by the remaining power of the tree of world were furious when they saw Chunzong appear. Originally, they had all been comprehending the mysteries of the world tree, and they had gradually gained something. They had never thought that something would happen. They had been blasted away by a powerful force. Even though they were not injured, they had lost the opportunity to comprehend the world tree. If everyone had been sent flying, it would have been fine. They would have waited until the force disappeared before trying again. Unexpectedly, there was still one person left on the tree stump. They immediately thought that the matter of them being sent flying was most likely caused by this person, or at least related to this person. His anger flared. In an instant, they attacked one after another, blasting out astonishing attacks. Many of these people had a Yuan underworld cultivation base. Initial and mid-level Yuan underworld cultivation bases were very powerful when they attacked. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen powerful attacks came from all directions, as if they were going to smash Chunzong into pieces. When it came to opportunities, one had to fight for them. However, when the opportunity was gone, some people would rationally choose to retreat and search for other opportunities. Some people were different. They would only give up after venting the anger in their hearts. The dozen or so attacks were not weak. However, when these attacks bombarded Chunzong's body, their speed kept decreasing. When they were about 1 meter away from Chunzong, they all came to a stop. It was as if time and space were frozen, and they stopped in mid-air. "Break!" Chunzong softly spat out a single word. It was as if his words were a law. The dozen or so powerful attacks that had been frozen were instantly shattered, like porcelain that had been violently smashed. The dozen or so attacks were of different colors. After they shattered, they looked like petals dancing in the sky. There was an indescribable brilliance. Just nice. I'll use you guys to test my new power. Chunzong took a step forward. With a bang, layers of ripples surged out in the void. It was as if Chunzong wasn't stepping on air, but on water. Layers of invisible ripples appeared on the surface of the water. His next step seemed to travel through time and space as he rushed into the midst of the Yuan underworld cultivators that had attacked. Suppress. As Chunzong said that word, an extremely terrifying pressure descended. Vaguely, there seemed to be a roaring sound in the void. Indistinct shadows appeared one after another, like the sky, the scorching sun, the wind, the clouds, the earth, the mountains, the forest, the vast ocean, the long river. This was like a miniature world. It was very faint and almost undetectable. However, if one looked closely, they would be able to see some traces of it. The Yuan underworld cultivators' expressions changed drastically. They were horrified to discover that they had been suppressed by a vast and mysterious power. For a moment, they were actually unable to move. Domain. They could sense that this was the power of a domain, but they couldn't sense what kind of domain it was. Sword light suddenly flickered as a sword swept across the sky and merged with this suppressive domain. There was nowhere to hide and no way to resist. Since they had attacked him so viciously, Chunzong naturally wouldn't show any mercy. Wherever his sword passed, there was no way to resist, and they were all killed. The sword didn't return to its scabbard. Instead, it became one with the sword and attacked the others. Kill! 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 He didn't let anyone who had attacked him go, regardless of which faction they were from or whether they were unaffiliated cultivators. The dozen or so people were unable to put up any resistance. They were first suppressed and then killed. Chunzong hadn't expended much energy during the entire process. The others were pale and drenched in cold sweat as they hurriedly fled. Chunzong didn't give chase because these people hadn't attacked him. As he allowed these people to leave, Chunzong felt a wave of excitement in his heart that was difficult to calm down, and it was like the surging waves of a river. The world's sacred tree's final gift was to give its remaining power to Chunzong. To the world's sacred tree, this power was insignificant when it was at its peak. However, it was a metamorphosis for Chunzong. Really, it was a metamorphosis. In terms of qi cultivation and body tempering, he had already reached the peak of the initial Yuan underworld and the peak of the initial divine body tempering. He had saved at least a few decades of cultivation effort. It wasn't easy to raise one's cultivation base at the Yuan underworld level. There were some differences even in the initial stages. Some people had just entered the initial stages, while others had been in the initial stages for hundreds of years. Their accumulations would definitely be relatively more robust. With Chunzong's cultivation speed, if he wanted to reach the peak of the beginner stage in both qi cultivation and body refining, he would need a few decades of cultivation under normal circumstances. But now, he had saved a few decades of time and reached the peak of the beginner stage. He was only a step away from the intermediate stage. Although cultivation base wasn't the entirety of combat power and was only a small part of it, an increase in cultivation base would still have an effect on combat power. However, cultivation base wasn't the main point, as it was only a side effect. The main point was the World Great Path. The power of the world's sacred tree was extremely mysterious and contained the mysteries of the world. If other cultivators were to comprehend it, they would be able to comprehend some mysteries of the Great Path and improve their Great Path. After all, the Great Path origin of the world was equivalent to a weakened version of the Void Great Path origin. Although the world origin couldn't be compared to the Void origin in essence, they were ultimately of the same origin. Chunzong had mastered the World Great Path, which was close to the world origin. The final power of the world's sacred tree was more than 100 times more useful to Chunzong than to others. This directly allowed Chunzong's comprehension and mastery of the World Great Path to reach an astonishing level. If the World Great Path that Chunzong had previously mastered was just a facade, then the current World Great Path had a foundation and a core, which was the final origin of the world's sacred tree. Although the realm of the World Great Path hadn't increased, its essence had strengthened. After the strengthening, Chunzong had mastered the World Great Path domain. The Sword Dao domain originated from the Heart Sword Dao that Chunzong had comprehended and mastered. Any ascending spirit powerhouse would master a domain. The only difference was the speed at which they mastered it. The powerful ones could master a domain at the Dao manipulation realm. The good ones could master a domain at the Yuanming realm, and the ordinary ones could master a domain at the transcendent realm. In the end, the so-called domain was a kind of understanding and mastery of the Great Path that one had mastered. Regardless of the level of one's cultivation, as long as one had a thorough understanding of the Great Path that they had mastered, they could activate a Great Path domain. In short, Every ascending spirit could only master one type of great path domain because they could only master one type of great path. Chunzong had already mastered the Sword Dao domain, which originated from the Heart Sword Dao. However, the world Great Path hadn't activated a Great Path domain. It had always lacked something. Only now did Chunzong understand that he hadn't touched upon the deeper mysteries of the world Great Path. Now, with the gift of the world's sacred tree, he had obtained the final bit of origin. Even if it was just a trivial bit of origin, it had become a catalyst that allowed Chunzong to truly master his own world Great Path. That bit of origin was actually nothing to Chunzong, but it was like a key that opened a door. The feeling inside the door was completely different from the outside. World Domain, the domain of the world Great Path. Once it was mastered, it improved rapidly. Originally, Chunzong's accumulation of the world Great Path was very strong. The only difference was that it wasn't thorough enough. Now, not only had he mastered it thoroughly, but with the help of the world's sacred tree, his domain had surpassed the Sword Dao domain and reached 6,000 meters. Sword Dao domain, 5,000 meters. World domain, 6,000 meters. One person had two Great Path domains. How amazing was that? After mastering two Great Path domains, Chunzong suddenly had an idea in his heart. Just by thinking about it, Chunzong knew that it was very difficult. He wasn't confident that he could do it. However, this was the only way to be challenging, wasn't it? Cultivation was to challenge all kinds of difficulties and go against the flow. If everything went smoothly, it would be too boring after a long time. The storage rings of more than a dozen people who had been killed were all taken away by Chunzong. There was no one left. Chunzong looked back at the dried-up stump that had lost its last bit of vitality. He looked a little lonely. After all, he seemed to have experienced many years in a short period of time. It was as if he had become a sacred tree that had experienced wind and rain. There was an indescribable feeling that was very profound. After exhaling a long breath, Chunzong waved his hand. The purple star dragon flame turned into a fire dragon and appeared. After absorbing some of the flames, the purple universe star dragon flame was slowly transforming. Its power had become even stronger. Ignite! Chapter 2245. The blazing fire burned fiercely, and the light of the fire shone in all directions. An incomparably hot aura continued to spread. The flame was at least tens of thousands of meters tall, and it soared into the sky. It was incomparably huge and extremely shocking. Chunzong stood outside the flame and said nothing. To be honest, even if the tree stump of the world tree had completely lost its vitality and was only left with a piece of wood, it was still a treasure. After all, it was the stump of the world tree, not an ordinary tree stump. Chunzong could have taken it away, but he did not do so. Instead, he set it on fire and burned it until it was burned to ashes. Just like that, it was buried. The world tree had sprouted from the ground, grew strong, and finally was destroyed. It had given its remaining vitality to Chunzong. It was like an elder worthy of his respect. Since that was the case, he had to let it go on its way with peace of mind. Burn! It was buried in the fire. Without a doubt, this incomparably huge flame that was as vigorous as a mountain attracted the attention of others. After all, such a huge flame was incomparably conspicuous and eye-catching. Everyone in the surrounding ruins could see it and feel the astonishing heat. Some people could not help but rush over to see if there were any treasures. In the end, they found that there were no treasures, only a section of the stump that had been set on fire and was burning. They left in disappointment. Chunzong did not pay any attention to it. Only when the flames were extinguished and the huge tree stump was burned to ashes did he wave his hand. A gust of wind whistled out. It was extremely violent as it swept out. The gust of wind contained countless sword chi. When it landed on the charred tree stump, it immediately shattered into powder and drifted away with the wind. Dissipate. It dissipated like smoke and scattered like dust. Born from the earth and returned to the earth. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. When his voice faded away like dust, Chunzong's body floated into the distance. The huge tree stump on the ground of the ruins had already disappeared without a trace. There was only a huge charred mark that proved something. The tree of world disappeared. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But it did not disappear because the last of its inheritance was with Chunzong. It had fused with Chunzong's spirit and became a continuation. As Chunzong flew, he constructed a map model of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his Divine Sea. This was what he saw when he merged the memories of the world tree of the Divine World. The destruction of the Great Void Holy Gate and its transformation into the Great Void Divine Ruins were all under the World God Tree's perception. Although the World God Tree had been destroyed back then and only a stump remained, the Spirit God did not fall into a deep slumber. She could still sense the entire ruins of God. However, as time passed, the World God Tree's vitality and power slowly declined as it could not be replenished. The range of its senses also constantly shrank. In the end, the Spirit God fell into a deep slumber, and her senses instinctively covered the surrounding ruins. At its peak, the World God Tree's perception range was more than 10 times that of the Great Void Sect. Chunzong's Great Path of the World resonated with the World God Tree and fused with it. It was as if he had transformed into the World God Tree and obtained some of its memories. Everything that the World God Tree sensed about the Great Void Divine Ruins was shared with Chunzong. In other words, not only did Chunzong know how many ruins there were in the Great Void Divine Ruins, but he also knew the distribution of each ruin. In fact, the World God Tree had also sensed the Great Battle back then. It had also sensed where some of the treasures ended up. That meant that Chunzong also knew. This would be of great help to Chunzong in his search for the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void. It was as if the World God Tree had provided him with a very accurate map. Not long after, Chunzong used his own divine thought to construct a detailed map in his Spirit Sea. It was a complete map of the Great Void Divine Ruins. It was not flat, but 3-dimensional and lifelike. It was as if the Great Void Divine Ruins had been directly projected into Chunzong's Spirit Sea. Immediately after, Chunzong used his divine thought to mark out his location. He also marked out the final locations of the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void, as well as some treasures and inheritances. He also planned out the shortest and most time-saving route for himself. Cheating. It was as if Chunzong had turned on a cheating device. This was the 3rd benefit of meeting the World God Tree. In the past, the Great Void Divine Ruins have been opened many times, dozens of times, almost 100 times. However, no one had ever achieved this and obtained such benefits because they had not comprehended the great path of the world, except for Chunzong. The 3 divine treasures of the Great Void are the Void-Shattering Mirror, the Great Void Thunderous Robe, and the Heavenly Void World-Suppressing Pagoda. Chunzong thought to himself as he hurried along. He already knew this information. After all, the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void were very famous. He even knew the effects of the 3 divine treasures of the Great Void. The Shattering Void Mirror was a divine tool mainly used for attacking. Once it was activated, the Shattering Void Mirror's light would shoot out, and its might would be extremely terrifying. Destroying a star was a trivial matter, and shattering a world was nothing. Even if a Dominator-level powerhouse was struck by it, they would be injured. That's right. When the Void-Shattering Mirror was fully activated, its power was enough to injure a Sovereign Realm elite. Of course, it was not that easy to activate such a terrifying divine artifact. As for the Great Void Thunderous Robe, it could activate the Great Path of Lightning Domain. In other words, after obtaining and refining the Great Void Thunderous Robe, one could master the Great Path of Lightning Domain. A mighty prowess cultivator could only master one Great Path domain. It was only possible if, like Chunzong, both his chi and body cultivation had broken through to the Dao manipulation realm. Moreover, they had to break through to the Yuanming realm. However, if one obtained the Great Void Thunderous Robe, they could master one more Great Path domain, which was the Great Path of Lightning. It was said that the Great Path of Lightning could be overlapped with the Great Path that one had mastered, and its power would be even stronger. If one cultivated the Great Path of Lightning and also mastered a Great Path of Lightning, then the amplification after overlapping would be even more astonishing. Those who had yet to master a Great Path domain will be able to master a Great Path domain directly after obtaining the Thunderous Taishi robe. Those who had mastered a Great Path domain would be able to master an additional Great Path domain. Those who had mastered a Great Path domain of the Thunder lineage would be able to make their own Great Path domain even stronger after overlapping. Moreover, the stronger one was the stronger the Great Void Thunderous Robe's Great Path domain would be. If a sovereign obtained the Great Void Thunderous Robe, then the Great Path domain's power would also reach the sovereign realm. Finally, the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda's power was different from the Void Shattering Mirror and the Great Void Thunderous Robe. After all, the Void Shattering Mirror's attack power was very strong, but it could only attack in a straight line. Normally, if it attacked an expert, it could only attack one target. If it still had energy left, it could attack other targets in a straight line, but it was still limited. The Great Void Thunderous Robe was a supreme treasure that could activate the Great Path domain. Its power could be strong or weak. When it was strong, it could reach the sovereign realm, and when it was weak, it could only reach the Tao controlling realm. Everything depended on one's ability. The Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda was a strategic divine artifact. It had nothing to do with one's cultivation level. Once it was activated, it could directly cover a certain area and form a suppressive force. Under the suppressive force, even a sovereign realm expert would be weakened by several %. This was the first power of the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. The second power was to absorb living beings into the pagoda. Ordinary cultivators did not understand, but the upper echelons of holy lands like the Heavenly Palace knew that if they were sucked into the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda, all their cultivation power would disappear. No, it should not really disappear, but be suppressed and could not be used. What it had was only ordinary power, as if it had been reduced to an ordinary person. As such, it would be impossible to use one's own power to attack the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda. It would be impossible to break the suppressive shackles and escape the pagoda. It could be said that the Heavenly Void World Suppressing Pagoda was the most powerful of the three divine artifacts of the Great Void. Chunzong was heading in the direction of the Great Void Thunderous Robe, one of the three divine artifacts. This was the sensory memory of the World Divine Tree. As for whether it was accurate or not, Chunzong did not dare to be 100% sure. After all, so many years had passed. However, he was at least 70% or 80% sure. 3 pieces, his position and the possible position of the Great Void Thunderous Robe, were about the same distance away from the 3 pieces of ruins. The ruins of the Great Void Divine Ruins were very strange. They seemed to be continuously distributed from the outside to the inside, but there was also a sense of crisscrossing left and right. It was as if one could reach the innermost area by going in a straight line from the outermost area. However, this was not the case. One might think that one was going in a straight line, but one might unknowingly deviate from the direction. Previously, Chunzong had thought that he was going in a straight line. Logically speaking, no matter how big the Great Void Divine Ruins was, there were only tens of thousands of pieces of ruins. If he were to go from the outermost area to the innermost area, based on the dozens of pieces of ruins that he had passed, he should have entered the center. At the very least, he should be close to the innermost area. However, this was not the case. It was only when Chunzong used the memory of the World Divine Tree to create a miniature of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his spirit sea that he realized that what he thought was going in a straight line was actually slowly deviating. However, now, with the memory of the World Divine Tree and the miniature of the Great Void Divine Ruins in his spirit sea, it was very detailed and lifelike. It was like a direct projection of the Great Void Divine Ruins and could be called a living map. Chunzong had an accurate guide and would not lose his way unknowingly. With a goal and even more motivation, Chunzong felt that his entire body was filled with energy, as if he had endless energy. Chunzong did not stop at any of the 3 pieces of ruins. He used his divine will to sweep through them. If he discovered any treasures, he would make a move. However, there were cultivators on each piece of ruins. There were more than one, and they were all looking for the so-called opportunities and treasures. There were even divinity realm cultivators. Under the circumstances where they did not discover any treasures, divinity realm cultivators would not make a move recklessly. This was because if they made a move against someone weaker, they would not be defeated by someone stronger. Of course, if they encountered treasures that interested them, they would definitely make a move. Otherwise, what was the point of coming here? It was better to stay in their own territory and cultivate. There was no need to take such risks. Chapter 2246. The sword radiance flew across the sky and quickly passed through the dark area before landing on a piece of ruined land. Chunzong released his divine consciousness and started searching. According to the memory left behind by the World God Tree, the final location of the Great Void Thunderous Robe was most likely in this piece of ruined land. However, this piece of ruined land was not small, and the Great Void Thunderous Robe was not a big target. Without releasing any aura, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, he had an advantage. Since he was 70 to 80% sure that the Great Void Thunderous Robe was here, he had to search with all his might. Chunzong did not care about other opportunities for now. As long as he could find the Great Void Thunderous Robe and bring it back to the Heavenly Intention Palace, he would have passed the Taoist assessment and become the Taoist of the Heavenly Intention Palace. He was now the 3rd Taoist. He released his divine consciousness, and his eyes were sharp. The world territory was also activated and covered an area of 6,000 meters. 6,000 meters was a range of 12 miles. It was not small and increased Chunzong's search efficiency. There were other cultivators who entered this piece of ruined land and were also searching for treasures and opportunities. However, they did not have a clear target like Chunzong and were trying their luck. Time passed by slowly. Chunzong was practically searching every inch of the area. The other cultivators didn't do the same. Instead, they quickly searched the area. If they found any treasures, they would take action. If they didn't find anything, they would leave immediately. The Great Void Ruins was huge, and there were many opportunities. It was not worthwhile to stay in one place unless they were sure that there was a great opportunity. Otherwise, they had to search quickly. If they could find something, they would. If they could not find it, they would leave quickly and go to other pieces of ruined land. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time. People came and went in shifts. Chunzong was the only one who was still searching. He had already searched half of the ruined land, but still could not find the Great Void Thunderous Robe. In front of him, there were sounds of intense collisions. Someone was fighting and seemed to be fighting for some treasure. Chunzong looked and saw that the treasure was not the Great Void Thunderous Robe. It was very simple. The Void Thunderclap Robe was a robe that could be worn. Chunzong didn't know the 2 parties involved in the battle, so he naturally wouldn't interfere. Both of them weren't weak. They were probably at the top of the 5-star level. It was very intense, and they were fighting with all their might. The collision of the tyrannical power immediately caused severe damage to the surroundings. The ground of the ruins was extremely hard, but it was still unable to withstand the bombardment of such power. Dust flew everywhere, and countless rocks and other objects were sent flying in all directions by the terrifying power. As Chunzong looked around, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw a piece of black cloth on the ground, covered with silver veins. He reached out and grabbed it, then shook it. Instantly, the soil was shaken off. Chunzong's eyes flickered as he looked around. It's completely black with silver lightning patterns. It's a formation of the Great Tao of Thunder. Could this be the Void Thunder-shocking robe? Chunzong looked at the old robe in his hand and couldn't help but get excited. He didn't expect that after searching for so long, the void, thunder-shocking robe would appear because of a destruction caused by the battle. Originally, the void, thunder-shocking robe should have been buried under the ruins. In fact, there were some treasures that were buried under the ruins. However, under normal circumstances, no one would deliberately bombard the ground of the ruins. That method was not certain if one would be able to obtain anything. Moreover, it would waste one's strength for no reason. In the great void divine ruins where the aura was chaotic and difficult to replenish, it was very important to preserve one's own power. Although it could be replenished with elixirs, it would take some time. If one took too much, it would cause one's power to become less pure. The two parties involved in the battle didn't use their full strength. They only used about 80% of their power. They were constantly paying attention to their surroundings. When they saw Chunzong pull out a black robe from the ground, it was covered with silver lightning patterns. It seemed to be something extraordinary. The two of them seemed to have a tacit understanding and stopped fighting. In the next moment, the two of them immediately rushed towards Chunzong. They were extremely fast and flanked him from both sides. Their target was the robe in Chunzong's hand. Of course, they didn't recognize what treasure it was. They only thought that since it was taken out from the ruins, it must be a treasure. No matter what it was, they would think about it after they got their hands on it. Attack! In an instant, a solid fist print rushed towards Chunzong like a moving mountain. It carried an extremely terrifying power and directly blasted towards him. On the other hand, the cultivator on the other side struck out with his palm. The palm print condensed and burned with a blazing flame, emitting a dazzling firelight. The combined attack of the fist and palm had the power of 6-star level. It was extremely powerful and brought great pressure to Chunzong. Extreme lightning. In just an instant, Chunzong turned into a bolt of lightning and flew backwards to avoid the fist and palm. The sword radiance suddenly shone. He swung his sword, and the sword radiance was like a scroll that was quickly unfolding. Lingwu Supreme Technique. 11 levels of Flame of Heart. Great World Sword Technique. Boundless Earth. This sword was not integrated with the power of the sword principal domain, but the power of the world domain. The heart refining sword technique was suitable for the sword principal domain. The Great World Sword Technique had been driven by the sword principal domain before. However, since he had mastered the world domain, Chunzong instinctively felt that the world domain was the most suitable power for the Great World Sword Technique. As soon as he swung his sword, the two of them were immediately swept up by the boundless earth and enveloped in it. Suppress. The Great World Sword Technique under the world domain suppression power was pushed to the extreme. The two 6-star experts were suppressed by this sword and couldn't escape for a while. However, the two of them were very decisive. They immediately activated their secret techniques and erupted. Their combat strength surged and they attacked wildly. The power of the Taichu Sword Origin Body. Heart Refining Sword Technique. Sword 4. He raised his sword to his eyebrows. The sword radiance broke through the air and condensed a sword principal domain that was 5,000 meters wide. It turned into the most powerful sword radiance and pierced through the sky. The extremely condensed sword radiance was so bright that the two of them couldn't look directly at it. A strong sense of crisis surged in their hearts. They couldn't block it. This sword couldn't be blocked at all. It had reached the combat strength of a 6-star expert. The terrifying power of the Taichu Sword Origin was enough to tear through everything. However, the two of them were 6-star experts after all. Although they were pierced through, they didn't die. Instead, they unleashed their full power and escaped from the suppression of the boundless earth. The cultivator on the left took out a round mirror. There were cracks on the surface of the mirror. He activated it right away. In an instant, a terrifying beam of light blasted out. It exploded with shocking power and blasted directly at Chunzong. The cultivator on the right also took out a strong crossbow and pulled the trigger. A ray of light arrow that was as thick as a finger shot out. It seemed to be able to pierce through everything. Formation artifact. The two of them were using formation artifacts. The power that was unleashed in an instant was extremely powerful. It directly reached the combat strength of a top 6-star expert. The threat that it brought to Chunzong was even greater. However, Chunzong's combat strength could also reach the combat strength of a top 6-star expert when he unleashed his full power. He swung his sword and the sword radiance shot out. 4 intensive 1. The 4 sword radiances split up and attacked in 2 directions. The power of each sword radiance was extremely terrifying. It could pierce through everything and was unstoppable. 2 of the sword radiances collided with the attacks of the 2 formation artifacts. They paused for a moment and exploded with terrifying power. The other 2 sword radiances shot towards the 2 cultivators. This time it was a fatal blow. The 2 cultivators were pierced through between their eyebrows. Their eyes were filled with shock. Then 2 tiny figures appeared above their heads and flew away at a shocking speed. Primordial Spirit. Chunzong's attack was powerful, but the 2 cultivators weren't weak either. Their primordial spirits weren't destroyed. Instead, they took the opportunity to escape from their bodies. However, their primordial spirits were also attacked by Chunzong's sword chi. They were more or less injured. The 2 primordial spirits were too fast. Chunzong couldn't chase after them. After all, without a body, the primordial spirit speed would be several times faster than the body's speed. However, in such a place, the injured primordial spirits wouldn't be able to hold on for long. If there were no accidents, they would quickly weaken and eventually die. Only the primordial spirits of transcendent realm cultivators could survive for a longer time after leaving their bodies. Yuan underworld realm cultivators didn't have this ability. With a wave of his hand, Chunzong put away the 2 cultivator storage rings. Naturally, the formation artifacts they used were also taken by Chunzong. This should be a replica of the void-shattering mirror, Chunzong said to himself. There were replicas of the 3 great void divine tools. However, the void-shattering mirror was the most common, followed by the great void thunderous robe. As for the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda, it was the least common because it was too difficult to copy. Previously, he had also obtained a broken bronze mirror, which was also a replica of the void-shattering mirror. Could the robe in my hand also be a replica? Chunzong suddenly thought of something. Some replicas were very clever, to the extent that they could pass off as genuine. After the world divine tree was destroyed, it was possible that there would be some deviation in perception. Regardless of whether it was a replica or not, he would take it first. When Chunzong planned to put the great void thunderous robe into the 9 heavenly rings, a sudden change occurred. With a boom, it was as if heaven and earth were shaking. Electric light constantly diffused from the robe, turning into bolts of lightning that wreaked havoc. Lightning surged. Lightning wreaked havoc like a tidal wave, one after another. It was a silver-white lightning that was dazzling and resplendent. Numerous bolts of lightning crisscrossed in the air. Some were as thick as a finger, some were as thick as an arm, and some were as thick as a thigh. Regardless of whether they were thick or thin, every single bolt of lightning contained an extremely terrifying might that seemed capable of destroying everything. An aura that caused one's heart to palpitate ceaselessly spread out like a raging tide. In just a few short breaths, this silver-white lightning directly covered half of the ruins, turning into a lightning domain. Looking at it from afar, it made one's heart palpitate. What a shocking power of lightning! There must be a great treasure. An expert approached and felt the shocking power of lightning. He immediately revealed a smile. His figure flashed, and power filled his body. He plunged into the lightning and disappeared as if he had been swallowed. He was not the only one who entered the vast lightning. All the cultivators who came to this ruins either did so without hesitation or after thinking for a while. Wealth was found in danger. If one wanted to obtain a fortuitous encounter, one had to dare to take risks and wait for a fortuitous encounter. Unless one was a person with heaven-defying luck, it would be wishful thinking. Only a few people with heaven-defying luck had appeared since ancient times. They were extremely rare. Chapter 2247. Within the field of lightning, Chunzong was dumbfounded. This turn of events was completely out of his expectations, and he was caught off guard. He had only intended to take the thunderous cosmos robe, and did not expect such an unexpected turn of events. Now, the robe was constantly releasing a terrifying power of lightning. Chunzong could not get close to it, because the power was too strong, and it was beyond his limit. Chunzong did not know whether to laugh or cry. Since it had come to this, he would try to take it directly. He only needed to take the first step, the refining void seal. He quickly formed a seal with both hands, and once again, it blasted into the lightning. Again, something strange happened. As if stimulated by the refining void seal, the lightning that burst out from the Taishu thunderous robe became even more intense. As Chunzong's refining void seal fell one after another, the Taishu thunderous robe finally seemed to disappear and turn into a ball of blazing lightning. Finally, Chunzong's refining void seal was like a stone sinking into the sea. Chunzong withdrew even further. The lightning was too hot, and the pressure was too strong at such a close distance. This power belonged to the power of the great void thunderous robe. Chunzong's goal was to draw it out and let it release as much as he wanted. Without any replenishment, this power would not last for long. As long as the power of the great void thunderous robe was exhausted, he would be able to retrieve it. As for causing too much of a commotion and attracting others, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, things were not under his control. It seemed that this robe was very likely to be the real thunderous cosmos robe, and not a replica. At this moment, the first figure rushed into the lightning and quickly approached. His eyes swept across, and Chunzong immediately tensed up, and his hair stood on end. The transcendent realm. This was a transcendent realm expert. Chunzong could not help but feel his heart sink. If a transcendent realm expert was attracted here, did it mean that he had no chance to get the robe? After all, he lacked the ability to compete with a transcendent realm expert. This was the difference in combat strength. Someone from the Heavenly Will Palace. The Divine Tier Elite glanced at Chunzong and saw the emblems on Chunzong's robe. Since I'm here, this is mine. Don't make a mistake. Those words sounded polite, but there was also a clear hint of warning in them. Out of consideration for the Heavenly Will Palace, Zhang Xian was advising Chunzong to back down, or else he might just lose his life. In most cases, no one dared to casually kill the true disciples of the Holy Lands. After all, the Holy Lands had astonishing methods and might be able to track them down. At that time, when the powerhouses were dispatched, where could they run to? If they were in the void, it would be very difficult to escape unless they escaped to the outer realm. However, that was the territory of the outsiders, and it was also very dangerous. Therefore, as a last resort, the people from the major powers would try their best not to kill them or make them their enemies. Of course, if his family background was also very high, he wouldn't have so many taboos. The Divine Tier Elite's background was relatively ordinary compared to the Holy Lands, so he naturally wasn't willing to make a move on Chunzong. However, if Chunzong didn't know what was good for him, he would still have to kill him for the sake of the treasure. As for the future, he would think about it later. Chunzong thought about it and retreated. He wasn't a match for a transcendent realm expert. The other party only needed one move to suppress and kill him. Even if he used all his strength, it would be useless. That was an absolute difference. After all, he was only at the initial stage of the origin underworld realm. No matter how strong his combat strength was, it was only at the peak of the 6-star realm. Clamor, rage, or talk tough. It was meaningless. Seeing Chunzong retreat so decisively without any hesitation or talk tough, the Divine Tier Elite didn't pay any more attention to him. His attention was completely attracted by the ball of blazing lightning in front of him. What an astonishing power of lightning. If I can collect it, The divine tier elite's eyes blazed with an incomparably astonishing passion, as if flames were burning. Soon after, his power exploded. He opened his hands and grabbed, turning them into huge palms that were covered with shocking power. He grabbed the ball of blazing lightning. He did not know what was inside the ball of lightning. However, a lightning power that could release such astonishing power was definitely not to be underestimated. The palm formed by the divine tier power caught the ball of lightning, but didn't manage to grab it immediately. Instead, it was destroyed by the terrifying lightning. How powerful! The divine tier elite was shocked. Withdraw your claws. A violent shout suddenly sounded, accompanied by an incomparably blazing aura that swept over. It was like a violent stream of flames that bombarded the dike. It was incomparably violent. The divine tier elite was shocked. His expression changed drastically as he hurriedly dodged. You're from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain. I found this treasure first. The divine tier elite's expression turned grave when he saw who it was. His eyes narrowed slightly as he spoke in a deep voice, as if he was going to argue with reason. Scram! The divine tier elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain didn't intend to argue with the other party. He was extremely overbearing and rude as he directly told the other party to scram. At the same time, his eyes were filled with anger. Raging flames surged into the sky and intertwined with the lightning. The divine tier elite relied on his cultivation base and felt that he wasn't inferior to the other party. He wanted to speak again. With a boom, the divine tier elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain attacked. One palm, with just a lift of his palm, a dazzling scarlet flame immediately burned on his palm, causing his entire palm to turn into a flaming palm. It emanated an extremely terrifying power as it blasted out. Natal superpower. The divine tier elite in the black robe was shocked. He immediately activated his own power and his natal superpower. He turned into a ray of black light that pierced through the sky. A divinity realm powerhouse's natal mystique was much more powerful and shocking than other mystiques. The two natal superpowers instantly collided. The divine tier elite from the Omni-Tribulation Divine Flame Mountain's divine tier superpower was stronger. It directly destroyed the black light of his opponent's divine tier superpower. The flaming palm print was like the hand of a fire god as it blasted towards the divine tier elite in the black robe, shattering his defensive power. However, his natal superpower wasn't useless. At least it blocked a portion of the power of his opponent's flaming palm print. He was sent flying, but he borrowed the force to retreat. He wasn't seriously injured. Shenzong was very decisive. When he left, he didn't think that he would be lucky enough to stay. No matter what, a divine tier elite wasn't someone he could fight against. Since that was the case, he would leave quickly. Even if he had some regrets, there were 3 Great Void divine treasures. Other than the Great Void thunderous robe, there was also the void-shattering mirror and the most important heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. They were all worth fighting for. On a piece of ruin land, there were ruins everywhere. Broken walls and many weapons were scattered around. They were all divine treasures. However, because they were damaged in the battle, and because the Great Void divine ruins was sealed, they couldn't receive the nourishment of the outside world's chi of vitality. In the end, they perished and became scrap metal. In the distance, a violent and powerful aura of thunder exploded. It spread in all directions and shook the surroundings. In an instant, a dusty mirror that looked like a piece of scrap metal shook. Cracks appeared on it, and in the next breath, it exploded. Then a bright light shone out. The light was a faint black that was almost transparent. There was an ethereal aura fluctuation, but it also contained an extremely terrifying aura. It seemed to be able to penetrate and destroy everything. As the light spread out, the models on the ancient mirror gradually fell off, revealing its exquisite and simple body. The faint, almost black light gathered and turned into a beam that was as thick as a thigh. It shot up into the sky as if it could pierce through the 9 heavens and shatter the heavens. It was like a beam of light that broke through the void. This is the void-shattering mirror has appeared. The knowledgeable cultivators saw the beam of light that shot up into the sky from afar. They felt the aura that seemed to break through the heavens. They were stunned and immediately became happy. The void-shattering mirror, one of the three divine treasures of the Great Void, had appeared. When the power of the Great Void thunderous robe erupted, and when the shattering void mirror sensed the power of the Great Void thunderous robe and erupted with its own shattering void power, releasing the shattering void light, in the innermost region of the Great Void divine ruins, in other words, in the ruins adjacent to the centermost region of the Great Void divine ruins, a powerful tremor suddenly appeared. Rumble. It was as if thunder shocked the world. However, there was no surge of lightning. There was only a vast and boundless aura. The aura was mixed and chaotic. It was like an invisible wave surging, rolling up tens of thousands of huge waves that shook endlessly. Waves of shocking aura also sounded. It was like the roar and roar of an ancient giant beast. Countless chaotic auras swept over from all directions and gathered at the center. They became more and more intense. Gradually, they turned into darkness and descended, as if a demon god had descended. Rumble. The first black lightning appeared. It tore apart the darkness, but it also made the darkness deeper. Strike down. Streaks of pitch-black lightning carried extremely terrifying destructive power. They struck down from the sky one after another, as if they wanted to shatter this piece of ruined land that was adjacent to the center of the ruined land. It was extremely terrifying and could destroy everything. However, the lightning that struck down did not really destroy this piece of ruined land. Instead, it was continuously absorbed by a mysterious force. It was absorbed again and again. The ground shook violently. A strong black light swept out and rushed into the sky. In just an instant, it spread out rapidly. It was like a surging black wave that covered all directions. 10 breaths. In less than 10 breaths, the entire ruined land was covered by the black light. At the center, a small pagoda drilled out from the ground and landed on the ground. It continued to expand. In the blink of an eye, the small pagoda became a huge pagoda. It was as if it suppressed the entire ruined land. Countless chaotic auras flowed into the huge pagoda and were continuously absorbed. Even the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda has appeared. As expected, the divination this time was not wrong. The three great void divine treasures have really appeared. The group of transcendent realm cultivators from the sacred land were all stunned. Then, they were overjoyed. They immediately exploded with astonishing speed and flew in the direction of the heavenly void world suppressing pagoda. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.